Chapter 201, Post-Combat Dealings. A battle would never have true victors. Unlike in those legends and epics, war would only leave behind ruins, hatred, and endless generations of revenge cycles. The majority of ordinary people do not enjoy war, but why, then, does war still exist? Perhaps it is because of personal interests. As long as there is no effective or better method of mediating disagreements and clashes, and as long as ambitious individuals secretly manipulate and incite matters behind the scenes, war will never cease to exist. In this battle that involved the entire Northlands, the beastmen fought for their ancestral homeland, while the elves had participated in the hope of returning to their former glory. In their perspective, they hadn't done anything wrong. From the viewpoint of history, factions that start the battles would typically be the biggest losers in the end. Moreover, this battle was no different from any other battle in history, with every species fighting for their own race to have more space to live in. However, some things couldn't simply be measured by right and wrong. No matter what the reason was for starting this battle, it wouldn't change the fact that the icy Northlands was now soaked in so much blood, with countless souls having cursed the gods and the invaders before their deaths. The relationships between the various species, which had just begun to thaw, were now at rock bottom once again. Someone needs to pay the price. A post-combat reckoning was basically now the norm. Those who lost the battle would be dragged into a court to receive an absolutely unfair judgment. During such times, even the fairest of judges would selectively go blind and hand out numerous death sentences by virtue of the surviving victims crying tears and angry shouts. Alright, I knew that it was all rather meaningless, but it was indeed a way to vent. Not only was it a sacrifice to help appease the spirits of the dead who died despite doing nothing wrong, but it could help the survivors vent their anger and pain. Punishing the guilty was also the fastest way to aid the survivors in clearing their grudges and returning to a normal way of life. After this particular battle, however, we ran into some problems with the typical post-combat reckoning. If we compared those who had the most serious losses, perhaps even the pitiful Sluira kingdom couldn't compare to the beastmen who started this war. In this bloody battle, the Plateau Beastmen had lost most of their accumulated tribes that had developed over the past few centuries. It was obvious that they wouldn't recover for a significantly long period of time after this battle, and because of the Beastmen's tradition, where their tribe leaders personally led from the front, the large majority of well-known Beastmen tribe leaders had all died in this battle. Kill those Beastmen bastards. We want revenge. Why are their children and females innocent? Weren't those beastmen killing our children and females for their sake? They can kill our children and women, so why can't we kill theirs? After the glow of victory faded from the fortune of survival, the survivors looked at the whole riddled world before them, and they angrily shouted to counterattack the plateaus and kill all the beastmen and exterminate their entire species. The citizens' grudges were quite difficult to deal with, especially since they suffered so much from the war. It was impossible to use logic and reason on some things. I could talk an entire day about non-aggression and not starting a new war, and wax philosophical about the endless vicious cycle of warfare, and all the citizens would simply reply, "So we can't take revenge? Why is it that only they can come kill us?" And all my efforts would be for naught. Even without the non-aggression premise, our country can't afford another war right now. Not to mention that the remaining Plateau Beastmen would never allow the humans to slaughter them in revenge as we pleased. Leaving the Plateau Beastmen alone would evidently be a future source of trouble for later generations, and I already had a plan for dealing with them, but now was definitely not the time to pick a new fight. Let's find some scapegoats, then. Perfect, there are still a few who escaped and they're causing trouble. Let's kill them off to scare the rest of the beastmen. Perhaps I should celebrate the fact that in the chilly winter night of the final battle, not all the beastmen perished. Even among the beastmen, there were some afraid of death. Several tribe leaders chose to not bring their tribes into the meat grinder of death and instead secretly escaped under the cover of night. After their path of return became impossible for them, they would naturally transform into dangerous guerrilla bands for the sake of their own survival. That was why after the situation had slightly steadied, I sent out the entire squad of our knights to hunt these beastmen down. So, even if their numbers weren't all that many, their wanted posters were put up everywhere, spreading the various impressions I created for them. Some of my wanted posters called them Camel Baba and the 40 Wolf Thieves 1. and some the 3 tigresses and the 105 male beastmen. They were hence quickly captured and held in prison carts, which would parade about every city so that the survivors could spit on them and toss rocks at them. Finally, they would receive judgment for their crimes, and pretty much all of them would end up being hanged. History possessed plenty of evidence that invaders who failed in their invasion would end up the most pitiful group of all from the war. Their territory would be seized, they would definitely have revenge taken upon them, and a reckoning awaited them. Nobody would take pity on them for their losses, as they deserved what they got. They were both the victims of war as well as the murderers who started the battle. Apart from these tangible and intangible conditions, the victors would also never give the losers another chance to rise up again out of consideration for the future. There would definitely be numerous strict restrictions forced upon the losers, and the invaders, who had been so proud of themselves when they started the war, would have to accept even the most stringent of conditions in order to live on and survive, no matter how humiliated they felt. And these stringent conditions and humiliating restrictions would always intensify the conflict between them and sow the seeds for a new, future war. This was why I was especially careful with the treatment of the beastmen after the war. Even though I had already prepared a plan beforehand, I still invited multiple advisors and held detailed discussions regarding this topic. With my encouragement, each advisor gave their own opinions, but they were all nothing more than common ideas, what with trade restrictions, cutting off their food supplies, forcing the beastmen to give us hostages, and reparation fees. I almost wanted to fall asleep as I listened to these boring, standard ideas. Humphrey. Trade restrictions? Even if they wanted to trade, are there still any merchants trading with the beastmen? Any human merchants that would dare to do so would probably be killed off as spies. Cut their food supplies? Let's first finish remapping the area since Lorcan randomly changed all the topography. Force the beastmen to give us hostages and reparation fees? You should at least do your homework first. There are so many beastmen tribes. Just which ones do you want to give you hostages and reparations? If you force them too much, then it'll just be another battle. But when an advisor named Pirobs gave his idea, I woke up immediately in fright. The archaic system of tribe leaders needs to be eliminated. Only communism can save the world. In order to completely eradicate inequality and conflict from the world, we need a complete revolution to pull out the old dictatorship systems by the roots. The previous non-creative ideas made me drowsy, but this advisor was too creative. He wanted to eliminate the foundation of this world's ruling feudal system that was based on nobles and royalty. He was quite daring. More than 70% of the countries in this world were monarchy-based, so he could be executed as a heretic just for his beliefs. Cut off the heads of those selfish tribe leaders who only care about themselves and create a brand new society, making the foolish beastmen create a new high-efficiency communist society, which will. I couldn't help but take another look at this guy who typically appeared to be peaceful and quiet. This youngster was animated to the point that his saliva was flying everywhere, his fists were clenched tightly, and his eyebrows were jumping up and down. It seemed like he had endless amounts of rage within him, similar to that legendary revolutionary from my previous world. To spout such an unrealistic concept in a feudal age, I was even beginning to suspect if he was actually a transmigrator. Allow us to demand reparations and hostages from them. Okay, I retract my previous thoughts, it was just an insane man. After coming around full circle, he was still focused on obtaining combat reparations and hostages. My lord, my apologies, Pirobs too is in a bad shape these days. He is affected emotionally because he was dumped by his girlfriend, and he recently hit his head on a rock, so he's been a little. Another advisor wiggled his finger and pointed at Pirobs' head, indicating that Pirobs was a little funny in the head. Right after, Pirobs seemed to become even more animated, while his fellow advisors hurriedly began dragging him away, worried that he would spout something even more ridiculous. You rotten bastards left over from the useless feudal age will never be able to defeat the farmer warrior saints. Those foolish kings will all have their heads chopped off, and the mighty rise of communism is foreordained. This will be a blizzard, a mighty blizzard that nobody will be able to avoid. You incompetent. Okay. His companions finally succeeded in gagging his mouth and matters finally quieted down. He was, however, still struggling violently while being dragged away. Shut up. Ah, don't bite me. I'm helping you, Stop biting me. Cough. It seems that some of our advisors are under too much pressure and need some time to recuperate. Go ahead and give him half a year of vacation, and if he still needs more rest, give him another additional half a year. Although I said this, the conference room remained silent. I knew that if this continued, there wouldn't be any result, so I could only toss out my own prepared plan. Didn't Centaur Anya say her tribe also wanted to come above ground? Actually, the plateau is a nice place, and it's definitely much better than the dark underground, so let's have them come. Our participation will only increase the conflict, and the beastmen have their own rules, so in order to deal with the beastmen, we should leave it to other beastmen. After chattering on for several hours, I was finally able to resolve this issue, but the second issue was even more of a headache. The elves? They're truly such trouble. If I tried my hardest to find who was the unluckiest in this battle, the elves would probably be my number one choice. Their guardian god ended perishing, the four major elven kingdoms' main armies were completely wiped out, and while only Tassel Kingdom among them possessed some remaining combat forces, all of Tassel Kingdom's royalty was dead, and it was difficult to say if their remaining forces even counted as elves. From a certain standpoint, the Tassel royalty was also one of the main perpetrators of the war, but their previous king Adrian died in body and soul together with Felix, and punishing the Banshee Suana, who had always been against war to begin with, wouldn't be the right thing to do either. But this wasn't even the greatest trouble. The biggest problem was how their environment ended up suddenly changing. After their unnatural bending of nature for several thousand years was finally broken, the life-threatening climate had become the strictest challenge for their lives, and most of the remaining elves were still fighting against the weather just in order to survive. Forget it. Let's stop considering these things and save them from their disaster first. Otherwise, with all of them dead, this will be nothing but an empty discussion. The Borealis had already completed its preparations. After it finished unloading the mined metals obtained from the barbarian tribes, it was to be used by the second disaster relief squad in order to arrive before the first relief squad. And I was a member of the second disaster relief squad. Note: 1. This is a reference to the folktale Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves. 2. This may be a reference to Maximilien François-Marie Isidore de Robespierre, who was a French lawyer, politician, and one of the best known and most influential figures associated with the French Revolution and the Reign of Terror. Chapter 202, Disaster Relief. After distorting the laws of nature for thousands of years, the northern elves finally received retribution. The furious forces of nature sent forth heavy hailstorms to cleanse and purify this country of sinners. Blizzards akin to raging dragons ravaged the land as they pleased, and the last patches of green hope left from the previous guardian began to fade away. I seem to be getting too poetic, so let me just be direct. After the now deceased health guardian god's magic barrier, which had kept out the true forces of nature, vanished, the enormous difference between the climates clashed. The massive difference in temperature created a speedy yet unsteady weather front, generating hailstorms, tornadoes and other natural disasters. The forest guardian god's death also hastened the rate at which the plants would die, and tornadoes swept away much sand and dirt, causing massive erosion. All these natural calamities added up, making it almost impossible to study the situation. If we leave them alone, the northern elves will probably become extinct. However, we're unwilling to save them for free. This was the mutual realization that most northern human kingdoms came to. Their speed at assisting the elves was rather fast, or perhaps I should call it their speed at looting. Although the elves had long since taught the secrets of magic to the other species, as the species with the longest history of magic usage, they still possessed a significant amount of esoteric magic secret spells, techniques, and curses. At the very least, the elves were still the best at runes, foreign languages of other planes, nature magic, and many other fields, which incited the jealousy of the various human kingdoms. Even if some elven secrets were accidentally revealed on occasion, those lucky enough to learn them would likely hoard it for themselves. At any rate, the small northern kingdoms had no chance to benefit. While the other three elven kingdoms, apart from Tassel Kingdom, sustained serious losses, at the very least their royalty was still intact. Even though their main armies were now almost completely non-existent, they still had rear support and logistical squads. they still possessed the capabilities to reorganize and save themselves while retaining their guard against the humans. The other elven kingdoms still existed, but they were too far away and there wasn't enough time to save them. Although the elven gods seemed to want to do something, they still didn't take action. If we forcefully tried to save them, however, it probably wouldn't be all too different from an invasion, which would be rather overboard. We also needed to take into consideration the possible chain reactions that could occur. To be honest, it was the sudden appearance of a few dozen elven semi-gods that stopped the human kingdom's plans of annexing the elven territory. Those elven semi-gods were obviously the reinforcements from the other elven kingdoms, and the fact that they were all semi-gods was the best evidence that the elven gods were already beginning to interfere. That's why our aid for the other three elven kingdoms could only be limited to sending them the resources of food and anti-winter supplies that they direly lacked in exchange for gold and elven magical items. Their true treasures of elven magical secrets would be impossible to obtain. Tassel Kingdom, however, was different. The true god Lorsai had used her divine power to cause all the elves of Tassel Kingdom to turn into fallen elves, transforming them into dark gray-skinned grey-blood elves. It was doubtful that any other elves would accept them. After all, compared to the elves on the surface, the grey-blood elves were much more similar to their underground dark elf brethren in both physical appearance and characteristics. This was a vicious move by Lorsai. This basically cut off all hope of the Tassel elves of ever returning to the other elves. The Tassel elves that had no other possible route to take could only follow her. However, since Lorsai suddenly ended up perishing, all the Tassel Greyblood elves sank into despair. The other elven kingdoms hated them for their betrayal, while the humans hated them for being the perpetrators of the battle. If the Tassel Kingdom royalty was still alive, then they'd still be of some use, but it was a pity that if they were still alive, they'd probably just be dragged out to be executed. There was nothing more convincing than the accusation coming from a dead victim's soul. When Banshee Suana returned, dark plots were revealed for all to see, and the previous King Adrian was now known by all as an ambitious warmonger. Since this battle was the direct cause of the elven forest guardian god Clairladen's death and the rapid worsening of their environment, the renown of the royalty and nobility was rapidly hitting rock bottom. Add on the fact that they had lost so many in this war, and the Tassel government was completely incapable of organizing themselves to help save their own citizens from the harsh winter. The other elven kingdoms close by probably would have added fuel to the fire by raising armies for revenge if it weren't for the fact that they were also dealing with wintry natural disasters. After the several requests for aid asking the other elven kingdoms for assistance had been rejected, Tassel could only ask their other neighbor, Sloweaver Kingdom, for help out of a lack of any other options to survive. Even if they were just recently in battle, and even if most of the warmongers were now dead, a deep blood grudge still existed between them. The Tassel elves hadn't held much hope in this request for assistance. But Sloweaver actually agreed to their request. Queen Gleena did take into consideration the feelings of her own citizens and didn't send out Sloweaver's own army as a disaster relief squad, but she made it convenient for the other humans to go over and rescue the elves. Those other human countries' disaster relief squads that came without even needing to be invited began the work of saving the elves under the name of the Mist Alliance. Although it couldn't be denied that they were indeed rather selfish and basically acted like robbers while simultaneously saving the elves, it was indisputable that they did manage to save many Greyblood elves on the verge of death. And among all the disaster relief squads, the one that stood out the most was from a rather far away small country, East Mist Communal Country. Princess Nitren, who had become famous through this battle, led the squad together with all the believers of the Church of Law. They were far different from the other disaster relief squads that were no different from bandits. They really were working their utmost to save the elves. Everywhere they went, they would supply the elves with resources, search and find suffering elves, help construct temporary shelters for the elven refugees, and answer requests to perform emergency rescues. They had an incredibly good reputation. Repaying grievances with kindness? I definitely don't think you're such a nice person. HMPH, of course I'm not so foolish. I'm just not as stupidly shallow as the others. Do you really think they'll be able to reap huge benefits from the refugees, who are on guard against them and treating them like the thieves they are? My target was never that simple to begin with. Soon, when the refugees began immigrating, My words were confirmed and my choice helped me reap benefits. Through the continuous disasters, the Tassel royalty had lost all authority, and the neighboring elven countries were angrily preparing for revenge while the natural calamities turned this originally comfortable paradise into hell on earth. No matter if they wanted to admit it or not, Tassel Kingdom was basically falling apart, and now that the other elven kingdoms were shutting them out, several human countries attempted to open their gates to the Greyblood elves now looking to immigrate. But, over 90% of the Greyblood elves who immigrated chose the East Mist communal country. Their huge wave of immigration would bring many changes, and at the very least, they would bring countless amounts of tomes and knowledge with them. Yep, this was my target to begin with. Robbing them while they were down wasn't very meaningful. As long as I received most of their population, of course I would obtain everything in the end. Their choice was made in part due to East Mist communal country's recent fame, but more because of the good reputation that East Mist enjoyed for all this while. Not only did the East Mist communal country not get involved with the elven slave trade, but it was also a country that strictly prohibited slavery, whereas the other countries all tended to have elven slavery to some degree. In order to prevent themselves from suddenly becoming a random human's slave, and with the personal comparisons they could see for themselves from the other countries' behavior, most Grey Elves with at least a normal amount of intelligence ended up choosing the East Mist. And with the natural calamities helping me, I also did my best to convince Suana. Rather than staying there in such difficult conditions next to elven neighbors who were filled with hatred for them, she might as well have her entire species immigrate. Otherwise, even if they survived this winter, what would they do about the next? The moment the elven gods had some free time, with how narrow-minded they were, they would probably immediately begin plotting revenge for Tassel's betrayal. The other three northern elven kingdoms would be more than happy to be the vanguard, and this wasn't even mentioning the fact that Glina would probably be unable to stop all the people in Sluweer from looking for revenge. For a country to reach this point meant the end for them. Immigrate. In the entire Northlands, it's likely that only the East Mist communal country, which barely suffered any losses in this battle, that would be able to truly accept your tribe. You've also seen the reputation they've built up over the years, and they're also worshipping the law god in this country. Every species has equal rights as citizens. Even the guiltless one can live there out in the open under the sun, so of course your Grey Elves will be able to do so as well. Suana didn't reply immediately, and nor did I pressure her into making a hurried decision. I knew that she would definitely end up agreeing in the end. With all the reports of calamities, as long as the Tassel Greyblood Elves didn't want to go extinct, the path I offered her was the best choice of all. She could only act exactly as I planned. To be honest, I indeed had selfish aims as well, but she would still make the choice I wanted in the end because this was their only path of survival. Without a doubt, this was an entirely out in the open plot for mutual benefits that I made clear to Suana from the start, and Suana's agreement was just a matter of time. Before she agreed, I would patiently help with the rescue efforts in order to show my sincerity. In the rescue efforts, although the ferocious weather caused all small airships apart from the Borealis to be completely unusable, the Aurora Knights and elite warriors still gave the elves a deep impression, and many received a boost to their fame. The Angel Winger Aurora Knights, mountain-sized floating rescue airship, and handsome dragon-slaying princess with slightly strange sexual preferences all helped improve East Mist's reputation as well as give the Grey Elves hope and expectations towards East Mist. As long as Suana made the final decision and summoned her entire tribe to immigrate, the major transition would definitely be successful. Of course, there were also some things that I didn't know whether to laugh or cry about. Forever a friend of the centaur tribe? What's this? Oh, that's Lord Baofeng's new title. Since large amounts of forests were destroyed, the Tassel Kingdom's centaurs in the forests lost their own homes, right? But those stubborn tribe leaders were unwilling to leave their homes even on the verge of death. Just as they were all seemingly about to die off, Lord Baofeng intervened. It might not be the tribe leaders' fault for being stubborn, as from what I knew, these centaurs of the forest and the rainbow deer tribe all belonged personally to the now deceased forest guardian god. They might have signed some sort of contract that prevented them from leaving, but right now, my complete attention was drawn by something else. When did Baofeng start becoming a lord in people's eyes? It was obvious, just from this servant's comments, that he was a supporter of Baofeng. Considering that this servant was a half-beastman from Shaw and that might have already been poisoned by Baofeng, I turned to ask another human servant official. What did Baofeng do? Forget it if it's 18 plus restricted content, that I don't want to know. I heard the forest centaurs were just waiting for death when Lord Baofeng and Cassio went to them and challenged those stubborn tribe leaders according to their ancient traditions. With their excellent abilities, they succeeded in winning every single duel so far, and as long as they defeat some more of the eldest and most respected tribe leaders, they'll be able to take the centaurs out of the forest. Oh, he really did do a good job. I was rather astonished. To my knowledge, although that fellow seemed so respectable and honest, he would never do something that didn't have any benefits for him. I didn't expect him to work so hard at saving others. Thud. Elisa, who was on a nearby reclining chair, suddenly slammed the thick recipe book she was reading shut as she adjusted her eyeglasses and corrected my misunderstanding. The centaur's favorite sport is wrestling, and according to their ancient customs, they typically take off all their clothing and wrestle while naked in rivers or underwater falls. And those centaur tribe leaders are mostly strong males. Alright, I was no longer able to give my opinion of this any longer. After some hesitation, I could only manage to eke out one sentence. Good job. What else could I say? No matter what, saving the elves' allies would improve East Mist's reputation. As long as a certain individual's personal desires weren't unveiled, I had no need to stop him. Instead, I even had to support him. But keep a tight watch on that bastard, and don't allow him to do something ridiculous. It's already dangerous enough to leave Baofeng in a forest filled with animals. Also, those centaurs. Ugh! I just recalled the way he looked at Cassio in their first meeting. As I thought, I should have just killed him off at that time. If he creates some scandal this time, no, he definitely already created some scandal. I should say if his scandal gets exposed. I started panicking as I thought about it, so I suddenly slapped the table and stood up. No, I need to hurry out there and stop him. I definitely can't allow him to ruin East Mist's reputation. Yet just as I was angrily roaring, filled with a sense of justice, I was stopped. No rush, eat your lunch before you leave. Who knows what ridiculous news he'll be the center of next. It'll be too late by the time I finish my lunch. Amelia worked so hard on cooking this lunch. You should at least eat a few bites. Of course, it was too late already, but not in the forest of the centaurs. Based on my past few days' experience, after eating this meal I'd be back as a tourist in River Styx yet again. If I couldn't find an excuse to escape, then it'd be too late for me. No, I doubt I'll be able to go anywhere at all once I'm finished eating. Even if you don't eat, you're not allowed to go anywhere. I spent so much effort on teaching Amelia how to cook. I know you have no good intentions at all in teaching Amelia how to cook. Ever since you took that book titled Dark Life Stealing Cooking Techniques, Complete Edition, I already expected this would happen. Dark Life Stealing Cooking Techniques, Complete Edition? This is clearly England's classic recipes. Although I don't know what country England is supposed to be, their cooking recipes are indeed unique and creative. Not to mention that they're easy to learn, and it's quite convenient for Amelia to learn from. Yeah, they really are quite simple. There are only two types, either baking in an oven or boiling in a pot, and no spices of any kind are necessary. Just add whatever spices you like when eating. This is the true original flavor. This cooking method is outlandish enough already, and when you add Amelia's magical cauldron, it's already finished. I spent lots of effort on today's main dish, please look forward to it. Behind me, I suddenly heard Amelia's voice. When I turned around, I saw a huge fish head pointing towards the heavens, and its wide open mouth still had saliva that wasn't cleaned off yet. The huge fish's eyes that were in a daze seemed to be complaining about its pitiful end. England's famous dish, looking at the stars. Blar. A strong retching sensation immediately tossed and turned in my stomach. It would have been fine if it was just England's famous dish, but Amelia added her own understanding to it. Isn't this a deep demon fish? It's a mega dangerous magical beast with high intelligence, and it's incredibly difficult to deal with. Isn't it a specialty from the underground's dark river? How did you get it? It's actually still alive. You actually dare kill me for a dish? I curse you, I curse you, I curse you and your children for 10,000 generations. Ah! Amelia laughed, pleased with herself as she retracted her fist that had just knocked the fish unconscious. Didn't the recipe say the most important part was for the ingredients to retain the original flavor, and that the highest level ingredients were the best? Deep demon fish will definitely have a good taste. And, it'll be the freshest when it's still alive. Yep, delicious. As she said so, Amelia even personally had a taste right then and there. Ah, it hurts, my gills are gone. Don't eat my eyes. As I witnessed and listened to the half-eaten dish's curses, this abnormal scene became even more frightening to the point that I didn't even know what to say anymore. I could only cautiously retreat, intending to find a path of escape. But, behind me, some even more frightening words were spoken. Awesome, now we have ingredients for dinner as well. Teacher, what shall we cook for dinner? Although I feel more confident than before after finishing this dish, I still think that simple is better. Something simpler than English dishes, let's make Japanese food, sashimi. Something even easier than tossing it into a pot and boiling. Then will we be able to just eat it right away after cutting it up? That's right, this dish called sashimi is like this. Alright, before the topic could frighten me any further, I had already escaped. At this moment, I already made a decision to just eat outside for an extended duration of time. Note, 1. The undead, as named by Lilith and Roland in Chapter 198. Chapter 203, Migration. The disaster relief for the Northern Elves went rather well. From a certain standpoint, it was an excellent platform to flaunt our military might and organizational capabilities. Imperceptibly, the Eastern Mist communal country was already showing off plenty of might. There were knights that were capable of flying through hailstorms as they pleased, the Borealis that could ignore fierce weather conditions such as tornadoes, the huge engineering contraptions that could clear away so much trouble, and the incredibly adaptable four elemental sword casters. They were all the best examples of East Mist's power, which also strengthened our control of the Mist Alliance. Yet there was one other group of reinforcements aiding with the disaster relief that nobody expected. Their arrival further increased the speed of the relief significantly, but there was a small problem. This group was from the underground world, and was called the evilest existence of all by the Holy Church. In the previous battle, Annie Lade had established a certain amount of friendship with Suana. This led her to unhesitatingly bring her elites to Suana's aid this time around. Chaos, however, continued to exist within the Dark Elves, and the underground world needed to keep them under control. The underground lords were unable to send their main forces. However, they possessed a scarily strong foundational strength. Just their elites alone were a significant force to be reckoned fault with. With their dozens of gold-ranked and legend-ranked individuals having arrived, not only did they speed up the disaster relief, but the underground world's true strength also somewhat frightened the other countries. The most eye-catching of all, to the point where they could be said to be the foundational pillar of strength of the underground, were a group of Dark Elf Knights. Yep, in the entire world, only Sulphur Mountain City could boast of such a group of Dark Elf Knights. Town security had sent them here to assist in the disaster relief, and since they were already experienced in keeping order within cities as well as in dealing with various dangers, searching through rubble and saving people were basically their specialty. The lowest of them were of the silver rank, and Law Knights were excellent tanks to begin with. Their enchanted armor was also the newest addition from this year. As the only main forces of Sulphur Mountain City, City Lord Danny unhesitatingly gave them the best equipment. Only a holy sword per individual in the past. Sulphur Mountain City was now much richer than before. They were all equipped with enchanted mithril heavy armor along with various trinkets crafted by the engineers. These female elves, who looked more like canned food, totally ignored the hail and tornadoes. After many long years of working as town security, something like demolition was normal for them. They were also used to dealing with disputes and explosions. This allowed them to excel at rescuing the elves from crumbling buildings. They could also help heal the injured immediately since they had plenty of holy knights in their ranks. In just a short while, stories about them spread throughout the entire disaster area. Buried too deep and the injured can't be found, 3 high-ranked holy knights arrived and filled the entire heap of rubble with holy light, helping protect those still alive. After finding an injured elf behind a wall, she actually ripped the wall apart with her bare hands, even using her body to block the falling debris. and she herself was not hurt as she rescued the elf. Simply amazing. The Sulphur Mountain City town security definitely surpassed the level of the Imperial squads representing those human mega-empires. Their equipment was extravagant enough to make even legends jealous, and any one of them could go straight into an epic and be the main character. This elite squad, excellently equipped down to their very teeth, used this disaster relief as an opportunity to reveal their true strength. This led those who were originally waiting in the shadows for a chance to strike to change their minds and hide their ambition. And, so, the Dark Elf Knights from Sulphur Mountain City started becoming famous. What? Their only town security? That must be a cover-up. How could such a strong knight squad be used for town security? The incident that gave people the deepest impression was when the warriors from Sulphur Mountain City suddenly had a conflict with the Eastern Mist Communal Country's relief army. They even trapped the Church of Law's venerated, highest-ranked priest Xuiti in a corner and gave him a vicious beating. Yep, actually, just hearing the familiar name Gentleman Alliance as a mercenary squad in the East Mist Relief Army caused the town security forces to run wild. You bastards! After leaving you alone for a while, you've multiplied so much in number. But we're here now. Today shall be your end. Xuiti, we caught you red-handed. We've finally captured you again. Sisters, deal with them. Alright, the Gentleman Alliance indeed had people who were difficult for anyone to accept, such as the close-slicing swordsman and so on, but Xuiti was somewhat wronged. He actually didn't do all that much. It was just that Archbishop Xuiti was so concerned about the elves suffering from the winter catastrophe that he took off his robes and undershirts for the elves to put on against the cold, and he only wore a pair of underpants as he continued his disaster relief. Even if it lacked elegance, the Archbishop's strong body had a masculine attractiveness to it, not to mention that this was due to the situation at hand. Nobody would read too much into it. However, it was evident that these dark elves, who had obsessions about being proper, were utterly unable to tolerate his actions. They treated him as a moral hazard, which was truly somewhat overboard. Everyone knows the dark elves themselves aren't exactly paragons of virtue. They must have been thinking dirty thoughts themselves to misunderstand to such a degree. For someone who's biased to begin with, the entire world is tilted. If that person's heart is dirty, she'll think everyone else is also dirty. In the end, due to the combined protests against injustice by all the other countries, Captain Yuan of Town Security could only come out and personally apologize. Fortunately, Xuiti was incredibly magnanimous and immediately forgave their rashness. It was obvious, though, that Yuan and the other town security elves weren't going to actually let bygones be bygones. We actually had to lower our heads and apologize to that pervert. This was basically the most pitiful we've ever been in history. No, this is the second most pitiful incident. The most pitiful is that this pervert actually became our boss, Yuan. And not even 2 full days later, they caused yet another incident. They chased around the friend of the centaur tribe, the legend hunter Baofeng, like a rabbit. The first incident with Xuiti was still understandable in the general public's view, but Baofeng was known to them as kind and respectable, even somewhat dull, and a good fellow. This half-dragon Baofeng, who was instantly attacked by town security the moment they laid eyes on him, was far too pitiful in the eyes of the general public. Do we even need a reason to beat up Baofeng? Alright then, let's just punish him for the crime of being Baofeng. Perhaps this reason would work in Sulphur Mountain City, but as the bystanders saw it, this was clearly unreasonable and a blatant abuse of power. Do you hear that? The crime of being Baofeng. Punishing him for being Baofeng. He clearly didn't even do anything. This is too much. They're just big bullies. Everyone knows who's in the right. Perhaps these elf ladies still have some biased views against me, Baofeng. I can understand. Or perhaps they're suffering from too much stress, and if beating me up can relieve their pressure and help alleviate their biased views, then please, come. Baofeng's magnanimity made the Dark Elf Knights seem more unreasonable, maybe even insane in contrast. Listen to Baofeng's resolve. He's basically a saint. Sulphur Mountain City's town security, even if they're astonishingly powerful, their moral characters and narrow-mindedness are, humph, not even scratching the surface of Lords Xuiti or Baofeng's. Tui. Alright, in a way, This was all just a repeat of certain past events at Sulphur Mountain City. The Gentleman Alliance had succeeded once again in toying with town security, albeit paying a small price in doing so this time. Of course, if I personally appeared, I could indeed clear up all misunderstandings, but that would mean I would have to explain those past incidents in the underground world and about Baofeng and Xuiti's true natures. I hesitated for just 1 second before making my decision. The Gentleman Alliance had messed around with the town security for many times before this anyways, and I might as well leave the Church of Law and the above-ground Gentleman Alliance's reputations intact. Soon, however, I didn't have time to spare for such small matters. Thanks to the underground world's Lord Danny's sincere persuasion, Suana finally made her decision to have her entire tribe emigrate. Of course, her target was the Eastern Mist communal country, sparsely populated wide swaths of land. Sincere persuasion? Annie knows how to do that? Wasn't she always supremely ineloquent? I thought that she was just like Adam, only knowing how to persuade others with her fists. What happened? Did she learn something new? You're actually treating it as true? Suana and the Grey Elves were just using Annie as an excuse, to leave themselves at least a little face. What really happened was that when Annie was chatting with Suana, she casually mentioned it seems that this place is unlivable now. How about coming to the underground world together with me? If not, I think Brother Roland's East Mist is okay as well. Obviously, such a casual invitation would seem to lack sincerity, and the real reason for Suana to have the resolution to decide the fate of her entire tribe couldn't possibly involve a concept as abstract as sincerity to begin with. It seems they think we're reliable enough to carry them, so they got on board. After Suana became the new queen of Tassel Kingdom, even she had to abandon all personal emotions and place the benefits to her tribe first and foremost. The current Tassel Kingdom had obviously angered too many. Even if they made it past the winter catastrophe, it was definite that there would be others looking to rub salt in their wounds. Moreover, since their entire species was now a new one, they couldn't count on the elven gods anymore, and they needed to find a faction to join and side under in order to ensure their survival. Although it was already guaranteed that they needed to join another faction, the important part was which faction to join. If that faction ended up falling, then there would truly be no more future for the Grey Elves. If the other human kingdoms had been able to display an excellent force of might, perhaps the elves might have made another choice, but the Eastern Mist communal country was the indisputable main character in both the battle and the disaster relief that came afterward. The power and foundational strength that they showed was just one facet. Their tight connections with the underground world, the new guiltless faction, the Church of Law and many others were also critical factors. Most important of all was East Mist's obvious rapid development and new technology, along with a plan for the Mist Alliance, which was likely to involve the entire Northlands. For a politician like Suana who valued what would benefit her tribe above all, the choice she should make was quite clear. The rest was dealing with internal disagreement and coming up with a compromise that those disagreeing could accept. To be honest, in order to have the elves, who had no concept of the flow of time at all and would always get themselves locked down in pointless arguments, to come to a decision so quickly, Suana had truly given it her all. It could be said that she possessed her own selfish way of thinking as well. Am I an elf? Or an undead? I'm clearly an undead now, but the surviving Grey Elves are all relying on me. Perhaps only the home of the guiltless, the East Mist, can be my home as well. I'm tired. So tired. As long as my tribe can survive through this, I shall find some place to rest. I'm already dead, anyways. After the dishonorable plot that had incited the battle was revealed, the council of elders that had originally held the reins of power ended up being overthrown. Those elders, those co-conspirators of the former king, Adrian, were all dragged down from their pedestals by furious Grey Elf civilians. Any elders who were able to keep their lives in the end were among the most fortunate. The ironic part, however, was that Suana had accomplished what her father Adrian had always dreamed of and worked hard all his life for, completely controlling all of Tassel Kingdom, yet it was at the cost of her own life and the very existence of Tassel Kingdom itself. After such a massive immigration, even the most optimistic of the Tassel Grey Elves knew that no matter how generous East Mist was, they wouldn't possibly allow them to become a country within a country. In the short term, perhaps they could still live in a relatively isolated district, but if they were to continue to reside there for the long term, or perhaps forever, the only choice was for them to be scattered among the original residents. Not only would this be beneficial for the Eastern Mist communal country, but it would also be beneficial for the Grey Elves. And once all this happened, Tassel Kingdom, which had several thousand years of history, would be at an end. All that would remain would be a new species of the Eastern Mist communal country, the East Mist Grey Elves. When the huge hordes of elven migration squads embarked upon their journey, the Grey Elves that were already becoming homesick would turn their heads and gaze backward with every few steps, as if they were praying for a sudden miracle to erase the natural catastrophes and the dark clouds of war. And it was at this moment that a familiar song rang out again. Dajda Jadi, Kasuad Esta. Our distant relatives, where did you go? We miss you here in the homeland. Once again, the undead Banshee Suana started singing that familiar traveler's song. Back in the day, when dark clouds of war loomed over their homeland, Tassel had sung this very song as she left her birthplace, by herself, to search for a utopia for her tribe. Frida LD, Cod. Are the ancient trees at home still verdant green? That familiar spring lake always reminds me of my childhood. The sky was so blue. Perhaps Tassel from that time long ago was smiling just like this as she bid farewell to her friends and family in her homeland. My wonderful childhood is now over, and a nightmarish war is right before me, but I, little Tassel, love singing ever so much, and I believe that there will be a peaceful and beautiful land on the other side of the mountains. Perhaps there's no such land behind these mountains, but behind the mountains that are behind those mountains, there definitely will be such a place. This situation was all too similar to when Tassel had departed to found a kingdom in the past. Even though it was supposed to be an optimistic and even joyous song, a number of younger elves had already begun to sob softly, while even more of them began singing the song together in a low voice. All the low elven voices soon joined together, echoing throughout the vast skies. My dear Aunt Susan, I miss you so much. But little Tassel still can't return home yet. Although I still haven't found my dream utopia homeland, I believe that 4-leaf clovers are always hiding beneath the horses' hooves and my dream utopia homeland is right in front of me. Tassel was the type to never give up, and she sang her song everywhere as she stepped quickly and lightly in that chaotic era, crossing mountains and oceans, crossing this mountain, that mountain over there, and the mountain behind this mountain, until finally I found it. It's right over there. The ancient tree in my dream is pointing me in its direction. I'm about to see my dream utopia homeland. Indeed, she had found it. The hesitation and melancholy in the song had all vanished, while the joy was now at its climax. Ddajdi ad dal dadaati. My relatives, I finally found a dreamland for us. Our new home is in the north. Chapter 204, The Goal That Has Never Changed. The Battle of Traitors, or the meaningless battle, no matter what later generations thought of it, the long battle, which had lasted from autumn to winter in the year of the Griffin, was destined to leave its mark in history books. As the grand opening of yet another holy war, this battle's influence would last for dozens, hundreds, even thousands of years. The elven god's plan had immediately met with a hard wall, and the beastman's southern invasion would have to wait for the next holy war. Due to a certain ex-lich's plotting and taking advantage of their weakness, I was able to plant visitors from the underground world in both elven and beastman territories. When the aftermath from this battle settled down, the underground lords would establish several dozens of satellite cities in these two areas, which would become the representative cities of the underground in the above-ground world. Naturally, there were plenty of dark elves living in these cities, and no matter whether they wanted to or not, they would become a buffer zone between the Slow Weaver Kingdom and the Elven Kingdoms. Of course, considering that Tanny, Centurania, Little Red and various other factions had all already applied to join the Mist Alliance, this could be said to be a new series of military outposts for the newly established alliance. As for the terrible national environment where they were now living, to be honest, it wasn't much different from the underground world. As long as they prepared beforehand, with the new Mist Alliance's full support, the underground world's residents had full confidence in creating new livable cities in this frigid land. Taking the Tassel elves who might want to return to their homeland into consideration, I had the underground residents leave a sufficiently large piece of land that included Tassel's capital, Tassel City, for the elves, they could still retain a small piece of homeland to return to. Of course, if my plan was entirely successful, the Grey Elves would lead a nice life in East Mist and wouldn't even want to return to the north where it was now snow and ice year-round and much more desolate. As for the beastmen from the plateaus, they may seem difficult to deal with, but due to the serious losses taken by the beastmen coupled with an ancient custom of theirs, it was actually quite easy. When a tribe suffers serious losses, the tribe shall join a stronger tribe, and be annexed by it, in order to ensure the survival of the tribe. When the plateau beastmen who suffered losses to the point where not a single family was left untouched saw the strong and fresh underground beastmen moving in large numbers into their territory, they were unable to stop them. No, I should correct myself, they were delighted to see themselves being annexed, as they lacked male beastmen and numerous resources after losing the battle to such a degree. If hatred is a dark ink that's impossible to whiten, then just mix it with a large amount of clear water to dilute it. Even if pain is difficult to bear, time can lessen everything. Perhaps the merging of the underground and plateau beastmen would require several dozens, even several hundreds of years. But when the underground beastmen annexed this wild area that would always bring war, according to my agreement with the underground beastmen, both them and the beastmen became a part of the new Mist Alliance. Of course, merging and getting along with each other was always a mutual effort. In order to avoid getting into another cycle of war with the beastmen, I would also inject other species members into this area in order to dilute its one species makeup and create a balance between various species. This may seem to be an underhanded move, but it was also the only marvelous move that would truly break the cycle of battles between us and the beastmen, where the beastmen would have a large southern invasion every few decades. Even if I might never see the effects of this move of mine in my lifetime. War is bad, but if war really does break out, then at the very least I need to grab the opportunity and change something, such as completely eliminating the foundational reason for having the next war. And so, this was what I said next. Beastmen countries? Elven countries? Hey, why do we need to make such distinctions? Henceforth, all borders shall be eliminated between every member country of the Mist Alliance. Only the simplest of procedures will be required for anyone to travel or move as they please within this entire area. This was doubtlessly a groundbreaking proposal for this feudal generation where land was at the center of everything and population was considered an important resource. Every lord had their own system for managing their citizens and census. Allowing citizens to travel as they pleased was basically unheard of. Just the suggestion that went against the times caused an uproar and even fierce opposition from the member countries of the Mist Alliance. The Rhodes Kingdom, which had already agreed to join the Mist Alliance, was even now intentionally slowing down the official process, thinking of backing out. I object. If we give them freedom, those bastard citizens will just all run off, and nobody will plant crops in the fields. Our territories will become desolate and useless. This definitely can't be allowed. That's because you're far too harsh on your ordinary citizens, which is the only reason you're worrying that they'll all leave. I feel that this is an excellent suggestion. Under this system, only territories under wise and well-reputed lords will flourish more and more, while unjust lords like you will be much worse off. There's more to it that you're not seeing. This old one and my ancestors have all been making such a great effort, but my territory naturally has a hostile terrain that's impossible to improve. If a large amount of my citizens run off, this old one would be too ashamed to face my ancestors. Considering that East Mist's reputation was quite high and that Slough was currently undergoing reconstruction during its weak period, I believe that I could borrow the renown gained from the battle to forcefully push this idea of mine. Yet the forceful opposition from the other local countries' leaders caused me to be unable to pass it in the end. Well, since free movement between all countries of the Mist Alliance was no longer a possibility, I tried for the next best thing. I passed a movement policy between countries. Of course, the procedures required would be incredibly complex, and the number of people allotted for moving was also quite limited in number. But if someone chose either the Beastmen or the Elves' territory, there were no limits, and that person would even receive a large number of benefits for free. I had wanted to truly unify the Mist Alliance and completely eliminate racial prejudices within, so this freedom of movement, a representation of a peaceful age, is something I absolutely have to realize. It seems I underestimated the old stubborn fools of this generation's adherence to their outdated ideals. In that case, I'll just bide my time. If this generation is no good, then I'll wait for the second, and if the second's still no good, how about the fourth or the fifth? Then, from today on, I'm also going to use the Church of Law to deal with those that are a bit overboard. My goal had never changed. I wanted to have Sulphur Mountain City's flourishment be reenacted above ground, to have Taurens and Holy Knights drink together in bars, to have evil dark elves also able to have holy jobs, to have everyone live in a way that wasn't determined by what species they belonged to live instead in a country where they would be judged by their personal qualities rather than their species. This was my dream, my wonderful dream that I had had for half my life already. In order to have all the species live together under a blue sky, the first thing I need to do is to make them see their new neighbors without bias. Only by accomplishing this would I be able to truly destroy this so-called concept known as the Holy War. Otherwise, the loser species from this time would always come back again in the future, and nobody would ever win unless they exterminated an entire race. Yet was that possible? It was never possible to kill off an entire species. Hatred would only beget new chains of revenge, and the snowball effect of battle would only keep increasing. What awaited in the end would only be total destruction with no winners on either side. True peace can't be accomplished without an accumulated build-up of thousands of years. In that case, while I'm still alive, at the very least I can go for peace on the surface. I had already created the standard known as law for judging people individually. The next step was to improve the relationship between all the species, letting them personally witness that their neighbors weren't born evil, that their neighbors didn't need to drink blood and eat human meat every day. Bias was always born out of a combination of a sense of distance, foreignness, and fear. Many countries also use the popular and effective method of demonizing neighboring countries or other species in order to turn attention away from internal disagreements. Not to mention that there would always be those with no sense of morality whatsoever spreading false rumors to incite others, letting there be always those who believe that other species ate humans for food. It was only natural that there would be bias. In the eyes of most people, when all these stories and rumors combined, the beastmen were human-eating wild animals, the Shah and half-bloods were demons who were humans by day and beasts by night, and the northern barbarians were an undeveloped, illiterate tribe incapable of proper speech. In the eyes of those major human countries in the Central Plains, our people of the mist was also no better than a bunch of poor savages that lacked culture. Just as how rumors would always become more ridiculous as they spread, biased people would always become more and more biased, which would further increase the conflicts between species, with even a small incident becoming a huge one. And once a conflict intensified, it would be time for glorious achievements for the country and slaying demons and beasts in war. Those executioners would invade other countries to kill their females and young and would be decorated as epic heroes. The Mist Kingdom from long ago had collapsed just like this. In the overarching human society, the Mist Kingdom was different from all the other human kingdoms and was viewed with bias. Under the incitement of false tales, the neighboring countries treated the Mist Kingdom as the reason they were financially poor, and in the end that unnecessary battle ended up occurring explosively. Increased communication and improved relationships are the only things that can eliminate bias. They were the foundation that allowed for the miracle of many species living together peacefully in Sulphur Mountain City. Pushing for such a system is the most important thing right now. On this alone, I shall never back down. Sulphur Mountain City was a small-scale experiment for my utopia. Now that I knew the requirements and prerequisites for my goal and the fact that it could work, how could I possibly give up? Perhaps I could compromise on other topics, but on this, I would never ever back down. Those lords' objections? That was never a problem to begin with. Maybe I was acting too kind these days, and they'd all forgotten what I'd done in the past. Since I had already transformed into an evil demon before, who cared if I have to be demonized again? As long as the results was good, I was never one who minded dirtying my hands. Alisa, the new observer squad has been successfully created, right? Here's your first mission: give me a list of all those who opposed me on this topic. No, add even those who are neutral to the list. On this issue, I won't permit sitting on the fence. Do we need to directly eliminate those people? No, collect evidence of their crimes. I'm convinced that all these lords are probably guilty of some crimes. Don't let them find out what you're doing. These lords are all very cautious about such things. Then we're only to collect evidence on their crimes, and have the old fellows in the courts come out and get some exercise? Yes, make your preparations as thoroughly as possible. We're going to eliminate all of them in one fell swoop. As for the date, let's make it today. 2 years from now. We have plenty of patience. This will even help increase reputation of the Church of Law as well as bring in funds for the national treasury when we confiscate those lords' funds. What if there's a family among them that's as crime-free as an angel? That's not completely impossible. This isn't your first day on the job with me, do I still need to waste words? I was just confirming whether or not you were still the same boss I knew. Perhaps a relaxing life has changed you, or perhaps the beauty under the sunshine has caused you to stray away from the darkness. Did this require any hesitation? I would still make the same decision. Afraid of getting my hands dirty? I think they had never even been clean to begin with. If there are any among them that are truly as pure as an angel, I'll give that person another chance to choose. If they still decide to stand against me and be an obstacle to realizing my plan, hey, let that person go become a real angel in the heavens. Elisa faded into the shadows, leaving only the echo of her sentence behind. Your wish is our command. Fierce, widespread sandstorms raged throughout the lands, and gigantic floating rocks filled the skies. However, what was most difficult to accept was that everything here was black and white, entirely colorless. The monochrome was mentally difficult to adapt to, as looking at such surroundings for just a moment would cause dizziness and discomfort. And this wasn't even mentioning the sand, which everyone kept inhaling due to the fierce winds, making it difficult to breathe. In the distance, mountains could be seen slowly advancing. Those towering peaks were hidden in the clouds, but when assisted by binoculars, one would discover that those mountains were, in actuality, stone giants and beasts. They were simply massive to the extent that their upper halves couldn't even be discerned through the clouds and floating islands. This was obviously an inhospitable place. It was the Earth elemental plane. Here, on a certain floating island, a group of visitors had just arrived and were beginning to set up camp. As I felt the tremendous will of the Earth in the distance, I smiled in satisfaction. Little Broemrita Lorcan, I wonder how you're recuperating from your injuries? I'm here to see how you're doing. I could sense that somewhere deep within the core of the Earth, that familiar Earth elemental god was in a deep sleep. Perhaps he would be astonished to find us here when he woke up. You want to run away after antagonizing me? HMPH. Don't even dream about it. I had wanted to say a few more aggressive words to look cool, but behind me, numerous complaints had already been expressed. Roland, stop smiling so foolishly, hurry up and come help us set up the tents. Adam seemed to be in a bad mood, probably because he realized that he would be sent to the front lines again as a meat shield. Yeah, stop lazing around. Do you think that standing on that rock and talking to yourself means that you don't need to work? Hurry up and come help us already. Alright. My motive in pretending to make exclamations while standing here was seen through, and under the watchful, angry gazes of everyone, I obediently started helping out. Camping in such an environment was obviously no easy task. The tents of those gnome merchants, who had claimed to sell dimensional related items, were obviously fake products. Not even bringing up the fact that the tents couldn't even stand up properly, the anti-sand enchantments on them were nothing but a joke, as the endless amount of sand blown by the wind almost immediately ended up burying the tents. And so, after a short discussion, we decided to just dig some holes in the ground as our temporary quarters. If we don't eliminate the problem at the root, it'll just come back to us again and again. Everyone's seen Immortal Lorcan's hatred and desire for revenge from last time, and his final, vicious revenge against us hit us where we were weakest, almost causing our defeat. Such a guy will definitely take revenge on us again someday, and if he gives it his all and causes some major earthquakes in Anchuan or a fissure to run through Defender, then we'd suffer major losses. It's best to beat him while he's down. I was no fool who would only passively react to threats. Since Immortal Lorcan had both the ability and motive to threaten us, and he might come out again at any time for revenge, it was only natural that I would want the advantage by making the first move. However, He was quite strong, and he would only be stronger in the earth elemental plane, so without sufficient strength behind me as backup, attacking him here would be tantamount to suicide. Hence, I sent out an invitation letter, but there was no response for a long time. 2 weeks ago, that familiar friend finally agreed to my invitation, but he brought along an unexpected guest. The guest was an ethereal shadow that seemed to fluctuate between solidity and transparence, and when she took off her hat, I saw a blue-haired elven maiden. Her long, silky hair reached all the way to the ground, and her crystal-like eyes seemed to be smiling warmly. Although I did not recognize her beautiful face as she smiled at me, the waves of divine power she emanated resembled ripples of water and were quite familiar to me. After only a short moment of surprise, I sucked in a breath of cold air. Aeolus, the water elemental goddess. Note: 1. He is referring to himself in third person. Chapter 205, God Quest. It is better to be a naive idiot than it is to be immortal Lorcan. Roland missed. There was no such quote in this world until I arrived. From a certain standpoint, immortal Lorcan should even thank me for helping him be remembered by history. Cough. I should get back to the point. When Aeolus appeared before me, my first thought was that she had learned the truth about the incident in Holland and was now here for revenge. My fear, however, turned out to be for naught. It transpired that after the wind elemental god Cambion received my invitation letter, he brought another elemental goddess who also had a deep grudge against immortal Lorcan in order to increase our chances of victory. Back in the day, immortal Lorcan joined the group assault against Sidon War. If it wasn't for his earth seal that blocked the water veins that connected to the ocean, my husband Sidon War wouldn't have perished in that battle. Her light-seeming words contained bone-piercing hatred, and her crystal-like eyes were filled with a grudge that had not dissipated but had instead only increased over the years. In a way, immortal Lorcan was truly amazing. At the very least, I didn't have the confidence to live so well after angering so many people. No, according to the system's calculations, there are far more that hate you. There is at least 10 times the number of pitiful people that have suffered due to you compared to immortal Lorcan. The number of your enemies, in both number and strength, can't be surpassed by anyone in this world. In fact, I have been wondering if I should give you the title Public Enemy Number 1. Shut up. Nobody will think that you're mute if you don't talk. Sorry, I wasn't talking about you. I hurriedly apologized to Aeolus, who had a shocked expression. In a way, this was my first ever meeting with Aeolus. After all, it was definitely overboard to tell her to shut up when she was talking about the reason for her deep grudge and her husband's pitiful death. Fortunately for me, perhaps it was expected of Aeolus as the water elemental goddess, but she seemed to have a very good temper. She only smiled and seemed to completely ignore my outburst. Since we all had the same goal, it was only natural that our discussion would be quite successful. This time, in order to truly kill off immortal Lorcan once and for all, our invading team could be considered rather extravagant. Although my team didn't consist of many, there were only 7 members. In fact, even the weakest among us was at the legend rank. Margaret, Adam, and Amelia, my 3 strongest veteran semi-god supporters, had all arrived, and they were the main forces for this battle. Eaglestorm, Baofeng, and Ren, these 3 legends could be nothing more than our helpers, and it was also a good chance for them to improve themselves. This was the strongest team that I could field that wouldn't affect the normal day-to-day operations of the Northlands. As for taking Princess Ren from East Mist, to be honest, Kelly and the others took care of most of the paperwork. Ren was nothing more than a rubber stamper. As for our reinforcements, I was only originally counting on Cambion to join us. After all, he harbored a deep hatred for immortal Lorcan, and everyone knew the basic logic of removing a problem at its roots, but I didn't expect the water elemental goddess to join us as well. After all, from what I recalled, we did have some small conflicts with her, and she should have been rather busy. The battle in Holland? That's a matter between the sea folk and the humans. I've already done all that was necessary for me to do. That Queen of Storms does remember you quite clearly, though, after all, you killed 3 of her beloved pets and even created that monster with their bodies. As long as she has some free time, she'll definitely directly take revenge upon you. Aeolus' words were quite believable. As for the Queen of Storms' reaction, it was just as I expected. As per my understanding of the ancient elemental gods after much contact with them, I realized that they indeed lacked interest in the holy war. They had experienced it multiple times already. While the benefits could be great, the risks were greater. Without enough benefits to be gained, it would be impossible to have those sly old foxes fight with their all and risk their lives. For example, what attracted Lorcan to fight to his fullest for the Beastmen was the role of guardian god of the Beastmen that had been left empty for such a long time. If the Earth Elemental Dimensional Door had successfully connected the Earth Elemental Plane to the mortal plane, Lorcan could have obtained the divine obligations of guardian god of the Beastmen as well as guardian god of the Northlands. This would make him a true god and rapidly increase his power. However, it was evident that the water elemental goddess would be unable to obtain any of these conditions in Allland. The Storm Queen's always been on guard against me, so she couldn't possibly allow more of the sea folk to become my believers, and nor do I have any need to fight for her with all my might. For me, revenge is the most important thing of all, and the conflict between you and the Storm Queen has nothing to do with me. Moreover, if you return my husband's possession to me, I can agree to a request of yours as long as it isn't overboard. I can also help you mediate this conflict. Alos displayed a rather sincere expression. To her, the ocean bottle itself wasn't important, it was a memory of her late husband. Possession? Oh, that bottle. Hearing this, I immediately looked in Camdian's direction. I had only brought it out that one time in the underground labyrinth in order to seal the earth elemental god. It seemed that this guy had rather sharp eyes. Camdian simply shrugged and exhibited a rather casual expression. Sidon War, who controlled the seven seas, had a similar status to the god of holy light for you humans. It's impossible for me to not recognize his god equipment, even if the divine power contained within it has almost completely disappeared. I hesitated for a moment, not because I was unwilling to part with that god equipment since it had only minimal divine power remaining and its practical usage was practically nil. The reason for my hesitation was because it was a part of my mega high level quest. Congratulations to my host for triggering a legend rank god quest. Revival of the Ancient Sea God. The Ancient Sea God Sidon War was the strongest god of his time. At his pinnacle, there were multiple main god-level existences under his faction. Back then, the Queen of the Storms was just a rookie who couldn't even fit into the ranks. Although he was crazy to challenge the Order Goddess Astrea and is now dead, thanks to fate and coincidence his god equipment, which contains his secrets and inheritance, is now in your hands. It has even been activated by divine power from the same source. Perhaps, in this dusk before Armageddon when many gods are now active, the power of the ancient sea god can be revived. This god quest was truly ridiculous and had 3 parts to it. The first step required me to gather sea-related divine power to feed Sidon War's ocean bottle so that it could evolve into a semi-god equipment. The final reward was an astonishing 100,000 fate points, with 0 punishment involved if I fail. With my understanding of this system of mine that loved to set pitfalls for me, the larger the reward, the more difficult the quest would be. With such munificent rewards, the final level of this quest would probably be unimaginably difficult. Recently, various bothersome things had been on my plate all at once, so I had set this quest aside. On one hand is an incredibly difficult quest that I may be unable to complete even if I try my utmost, while on my other hand are tangible benefits that I can receive immediately. I already have too many bothersome things to deal with, and this particular bother isn't too important to take care of. Let's just forget it. And, so, I personally handed the ocean bottle to Aelos. She received it from me and clutched it to her chest with an expression filled with nostalgia and sadness. Thank you. If only Sidon War was willing to listen to me, he wouldn't have ended like, wait, what? Just as she said only half of what she intended, Aelos suddenly stopped in shock. All that nostalgia and sadness vanished completely, to be replaced with astonishment on that pretty face of hers. How is this possible? There's actually still his divine spirit contained within here, and it's in the midst of reviving? How is this possible? Sidon War can still revive? My husband still has a hope of reviving? I'd never seen anyone's expressions change so rapidly. From sadness to surprise, from surprise to delight, and in the very next second, her delight turned to despair. No, Sidon War. I can feel your divine spirit disappearing. What's happening? Your divine spirit was clearly stable just earlier. Why is it beginning to disappear? Everyone else also had expressions of shock. Although the existences known as gods were just like cockroaches, incredibly difficult to truly kill off, for a god who had died so incredibly long ago to still have the possibility of revival was completely outside of everyone's realm of understanding. And just when he had the hope of revival, it started vanishing, which was even more incomprehensible. Hearing Alos's cry, I was momentarily surprised before I immediately grabbed the ocean's bottle from her hands. The moment it returned to me, the divine spirit contained within the ocean's bottle indeed began to stabilize. It was obvious that Sidon War's life was currently being maintained by my system. So, when the ocean's bottle no longer belonged to me, the system lost its power to maintain his life, causing the divine spirit to naturally start dissipating on its own. After all, this god quest's main goal in the end was to revive this mega veteran god from long ago. Alos was about to reflexively grab the ocean's bottle back from me, but she discovered the return of Sidon War's divine spirit and realized that it somehow had to do with me. Although she didn't understand how I did it, it was an indisputable fact that was right in front of her. For a divine spirit that was already beginning to disappear to stabilize again was completely against the common sense of this world. How did you do it? This is impossible. I hesitated for a moment before making another decision that was actually rather easy to make. There actually wasn't anything to hesitate about, as the ocean bottle would certainly remain by my side judging from the current situation. I was hesitating about whether or not to laugh loudly 3 times and say, "Your husband's life is in my hands. If you want him to live, then obey me." Or whether I should whisper into her ear with a perverted smile, saying, "Madam, your husband can no longer be without me, be mine as well." Fine then. These sudden flashes of inspiration were unable to be spoken out loud since there were too many spectators. I was afraid of getting beaten up. This is my personal secret. I think I'm perhaps the only one in the entire world who can maintain his divine spirit and revive him. Alright, I was doing my best to appear calm and steady, but my lips were arching upward and betraying my smugness. This was basically a heaven-sent gift. As long as Alos wanted to revive her husband, I basically had another ace card fighter in my ranks. Yep, just a fighter, nothing like forcing her into some pornographic videos or anything like that. I hate that the most. Those thinking dirty thoughts should all go do some self-reflection. Alos' expression was rapidly changing. As a veteran whose age could be calculated in centuries rather than years, she would, of course, know what it meant to be under someone else's thumb. The atmosphere instantly became chilly. At such a time, I needed assistance in sealing the deal. After I was done playing the part of the bad cop, I needed someone to play the part of the good cop, which was why I glanced behind me. Cough, Milady Alos, please rest assured, we don't have any extravagant requests. We would like to revive his lordship Sidon War as well, but there's still some difficulty involved, such as needing sea-related divine power to strengthen his divine spirit, and the current sea gods are all so strong to the point where we don't dare antagonize them. From a certain standpoint, Ren was an excellent descendant of the mist as well as my apprentice. She had a sharp mind and was also shameless, able to infer the critical parts by herself just from the knowledge that I needed the ocean bottle to increase its sea-related divine power and divine obligation. She managed to hit Alos right where she was the weakest. Alos' face kept flickering between cyan and white, and even her elemental body was now shining. Although her expression still seemed icy on the surface, her overly wild emotions almost caused her to reveal her true appearance. "Say it, just tell me what conditions you have." I exchanged glances with Ren, and both of us smiled. This was no longer even a negotiation, this was a lamb offering herself up to be slaughtered. "Relax, we're easy to deal with. You only need to." When I told her my condition, Alos' expression was filled with surprise. She wasn't surprised that my condition was too strict, she was surprised because it was too easy. I smiled when I saw her expression noticeably relax. "Let's take it slowly." She was so tense just now, how could we possibly take her for all she's worth? Since the critical bait is in my hands, I'm not afraid of this fish getting off the hook. If I force her too much from the very start, it's easy to make her resent us. So let's use something simple first to get her used to it. Once she's fallen into the habit of obeying my orders, she won't be able to get free anymore. He. He he he. My secret smile overlapped with Ren's. We merely exchanged smiles and all of the above was communicated non-verbally. Meanwhile, behind my back, everyone else was having another discussion. It's all over, Ren has been corrupted by Roland as well. Margaret had a helpless expression on her face. One Roland was annoying enough to deal with, and Elisa, who he taught, was also incredibly difficult to deal with. Adding in a Ren, who was becoming more black-bellied every day, it was something that would indeed make her feel helpless. That might not be the case. At the very least, I've never seen a single descendant of the mist that's a normal person. Just look at Glena and Carwins. Roland probably just activated Ren's inner potential. That entire family has the bloodline of perverts. Amelia gave an even more vicious conclusion. Adam nodded vigorously as he watched Ren and Roland flash evil smiles in unison, and he recalled how he had suffered due to Roland in the past. I wasn't in a hurry to go fight Immortal Lorcan to the death. Apart from having to gather information about this place, there were many things that I still needed to do in this earth elemental plane that was far away from the mortal plane and thus the sights of the gods. This holy war and battle had taught me a deep lesson I'd never forget. Especially with Carwin's, Immortal Lorcan, and Felix's appearances, all these god-level, powerful existences kept sounding the warning alarm in my mind. High-level combat ability had far too much influence on the overall combat situation. Every time one of them acted, it could just about turn the entire situation around, and in the past, Emperor Young Eye's forbidden spells would always be able to overturn any combat situation, but the current me. I'm so weak, it's so pathetic how weak I am. Yep, I was so weak. It was almost 2 years now since I had obtained this double diamond bloodline, but I had just reached the silver rank, and I only had a shallow understanding of my bloodline's power and job class abilities. Perhaps this would be an incredible achievement for anyone else, but I considered it a failure. Most of my attention has been preoccupied with other matters. Walking a tightrope every time, I'll fall off eventually, and who knows what will happen in the future. I don't have that much free time, so I need to quickly improve my power rank. Of course, to me, my rank was never a real issue, as true combat ability only had a partial connection to rank. But increasing my rank would bring about foundational changes, and my opponents would only become stronger and stronger in the future. Normal methods can't be counted on. In that case, let's use some trickery. Life and death and endless reincarnation? That might not always be the case. Chapter 206, Divine Sin. Endless reincarnation forms a cycle of life and death. If souls were the foundation of this world, then reincarnation was its most basic precept. The living were the living while the dead would enter the cycle of reincarnation to reinvigorate this world. That was why it was a huge taboo to create a life that wouldn't enter the cycle of reincarnation. Don't even mention personally breaking the cycle of reincarnation or making the dead come alive again. That was why I had never heard of anything related to resurrection magic in all the years I have been around, not even the basic idea of how it could be done. No matter how ambitious and arrogant Emperor Yonga was back in the day, even he knew that there were some areas he must tread with caution. In the end, he only broke the taboo regarding Lisa, which still caused Ayer to come looking for him. Afterwards, through some idle chatter, I had learned that Ayer's main divine obligation was to protect the boundary between life and death and to maintain the natural cycle of reincarnation. Pulling a newly dead soul that just entered the cycle doubtlessly triggered his limits, and when you add on the fact that the entire river Styx was part of his divine domain, I was basically committing armed robbery right in front of a police station. He absolutely couldn't ignore me. Don't even mention the river Styx. Even in the mortal plane, anyone who dared break certain taboos would end up mysteriously dying. However, this was a different place, and the true gods weren't omniscient. There were always places that even they couldn't peer into. Souls have the cycle of reincarnation, and the physical elements making up the world also need to be cycled. This world is composed of the 4 basic elements of earth, wind, water, and fire. The elemental planes are the source of each basic element, and they are also the resource warehouses for replenishing the basic elements in this world. But, the natural laws of the elemental planes are too simplistic. Due to the overload of only one particular element and the lack of natural laws, these planes could even reject the divine domains of true gods, turning into a forbidden zone for true gods where even they couldn't peek into. Back in the day, a few youngsters even almost managed to successfully fool me. I recalled that those were 8 years' words. He basically said everything but if you want to do something forbidden, then go to the elemental planes. This was basically no different from a policeman teaching a criminal how to beat the system, so how could I possibly miss his meaning? Of course, if Ayer wanted to stop me, he could still stop me since he was never an ordinary true god to begin with. In fact, he had found out about this vulnerability in the system after someone else discovered it first and then perished by Ayer's hands. But of course, in such a situation, Ayer could choose whether to interfere or not. And if I was the one breaking the taboos, he could just pretend to not see anything. What was I about to do? One would know simply by seeing the shivering cat before me, which seemed to be on the brink of death. The black cat was curled up into a ball and her watery eyes were filled with tears. It was as if she was a normal house cat about to be forced to take a shower, using the look in her eyes to request her master to spare her. Is it really necessary? What a waste of time. What do you think? I've never seen you afraid before in all these years, and isn't this your dream? You're getting scared at such a junction? That silly cat took a deep breath as her pupils suddenly dilated before expanding again, and her cat ears finally stopped shivering. Come, I'm not afraid. I was still hesitating, but not because of whether I should begin this experiment or not. It was no matter if Harlois agreed or not, as I had long since planned this experiment anyways. Instead, I was hesitating about whether or not to tell her, your ears have indeed stopped trembling, but your tail keeps thrashing about, betraying your thoughts. Cough, your tail. Ah! Harlois exclaimed at this and instantly clutched her tail with her claws, but even holding her tail tightly didn't stop it from twitching as if she had a cramp. After a short period of silence and awkwardness, Harlois grit her teeth and transformed into a blonde lolly. Your cat ears are still there. Ah! This was the first time I had ever seen Harlois acting so panicked. Humans don't have long, black cat tails. Harlois continued panicking. Nor do humans grow cat whiskers. Can you just finish saying everything at once? Is it that fun to tease me? Teasing a cat should be done over a series of times. Oh right, I just recorded the earlier scene with a memory crystal. You were quite cute, and I'll appreciate it slowly in the future when I have free time. Hey, what's with your claws? Are you intending to kill your master? I'm cleaning out my sect of traitorous disciples. Take this. Vicious tiger coming down the mountain. Vicious tiger? Ha ha. More like a cute cat. Alright, after this was the typical play fighting. At the very least, the play fighting helped her finally relax. It was only natural that she would be scared to such an extent. If anything went wrong with this experiment, she would definitely end up having her soul destroyed, forever losing the chance to be reincarnated. From a certain standpoint, the phrase that the older one got, the more one was afraid of death, was quite correct. Both Harlois and I still had too many unresolved regrets, so neither of us wanted to die right here and now. Perhaps your current physical body's imitation sensory mechanisms aren't bad, but it's different from the real five senses. And while the cells of greed can indeed continuously copy and imitate the metabolism of a normal life, it's just that, simple copying. It can only imitate and not give you the true qualities of the living, and nor can it truly subtly recreate a normal life's maturity and growth. This means that it's difficult for you to truly become stronger from the foundation. There's nothing that can truly replace living, continuously growing cells that have endless energy and potential. You've probably already forgotten the feeling of becoming stronger through cultivation. The feeling of breathing to awaken your body and have magic course through your veins can never replace that feeling of cultivation. If you want to continue getting stronger, no, if we want to continue getting stronger, this is unavoidable. Besides, would I ever do you wrong? Okay, I instantly knew that I said something bad. The previous words had moved her significantly, and she had calmed down already, but the final sentence was obviously unnecessary. You dare say such a thing? How many times have you wronged me? At the very least, we're in the same boat now. You're currently my magical pet, and you growing stronger means me growing stronger. If you die, my soul will be greatly weakened and will lose a huge piece. Do you think I would wrong myself? Okay, I instantly knew that I said something bad again. Her cattail and cat ears instantly reappeared, and even her blonde hair that reached her waist was all standing up on end. It was as if the cat banshee queen was so angry that all her hair stood up just like a real cat. I'm pretty sure you've wronged yourself numerous times as well. Hey, does anyone ever try coaxing others like how you do? It's even harder to feel assured now. I only shrugged and didn't explain myself. Neither of us was a novice greenhorn. Sometimes we just needed to complain a little, but we still knew what needed to be done. Harlois soon calmed down again, at the same time as the arrival of the other participant for this experiment. This well-prepared yet unreasonable experiment was now ready to begin. Shadow. I felt many things as I looked at this twisted shadow. From the very start, the frigid nightmare shadow was no ordinary frigid nightmare. After hatching through an abnormal contract, it was cut off from its host's soul connection and was left by itself for about 300 years, like a baby that was separated from its mother's nourishment before finally becoming a dead egg. It was no wonder that the frigid nightmares were never able to hatch it since the dead egg was already dead. How could it possibly be hatched using ordinary methods? However, I was an undead, and I even used to be the top level existence of undead magic, a lich. I'll skip the process as the awakening procedure isn't suitable for seeing the light of day. In the end, I received an unexpected product, a half-living, half-dead ethereal frigid nightmare. He was living as an elemental life form, his physical body contained his will and soul, and he was just born, so of course he was living. He was also dead. He had died long ago before hatching, and the only way he could move about in this world was through the power of necromancy magic controlling his incomplete body. Frigid nightmares are a mix between elemental life and soul spirits to begin with, and when you add undead magic and a piece of my soul into the mix, the final product would be anyone's guess. If you had to categorize it, you could only describe it as a dead living creature. The awakened shadow was abnormally dangerous. His true power was completely uncalculatable using ranks. He both existed in this world and didn't exist in this world. Apart from area of effect attacks that specifically targeted souls, no other attack would even affect him. He could consume souls, but it was unknown what he would transform into if he obtained them. His very existence is something unexplainable by the tenets of magic. Shadow is actually an existence that broke the cycle of reincarnation, and I somewhat understand why it's taboo now. This kind of existence is far too dangerous. He instinctually desires to fill the hole in his soul and devour all life. If it weren't for the fact that I hatched him and he listens to me due to his leftover instinct as a frigid nightmare, perhaps I would be the first one to be devoured by him. At first, I had intended to use divine power to help nourish him so he could completely evolve, but in the end, it only made the situation worse. He indeed received nourishment from Wumian's divine power, but his evolution had instead developed in the worst possible way. An existence that shouldn't exist and has unexpected divine power. A divine sin. Damn it. I should have expected that Shadow was actually a divine sin that hadn't finished evolving. This was the worst possible change of all. Divine sins were a type of existence feared even by the gods, and they naturally hated this world. I created his soul back when I was in the midst of despair, hatred, and anger, while divine power and the frigid nightmare egg gave him a physical body. As long as he was properly born, he would definitely cause a massive catastrophe for the entire world. What was fortunate was that he still hadn't developed any intelligence. He merely instinctively desired the destruction of all things, and I could still temporarily suppress him, but if I ever let my guard slip, something even more devastating than a war involving the gods would likely occur. But, to completely seal him away seemed like a waste, which was how I came up with the idea for this experiment. If Shadow is a dead living creature, then Harlois the Banshee Queen who transformed into greed is basically a living dead creature. If the two of them can combine and mutually compensate for each other's lacking areas, perhaps they'd be able to twist the cycle of reincarnation and have the dead become the living without undergoing reincarnation. In theory, this was workable. No matter how twisted he became, Shadow was still a product of my soul, And Harlois was my magical pet that had a contract with my soul. Shadow was a living creature without a sense of will or a proper physical body, while Harlois was a dead person who still had life and a physical body. With me acting as the catalyst for the two of them and helping adjust their soul wavelengths to be identical, I would help them combine using the same logic as how God's descent worked. And so, that was what happened before me. God's descent. Shadow, descend upon Harlois. A light shot into the blonde-haired girl's body. Soon, the twisted light completely vanished, and then Harlois' entire body transformed into a twisted ethereal shadow that kept flashing and changing form. Her entire body had transformed into a huge pillar of light that shot into the clouds. The tremendous divine energy in this area made it impossible to stay. If everything is successful, Harlois will receive a life and physical body, transforming into a divine life. She might even receive some of the divine sense power if she's lucky. And if she combines with me afterward as my magical pet. I seem to have broken every taboo all at once, hopefully, Ayer won't mind too much. Harlois and Shadow's synchronization would take quite a while, so I started focusing on the other work ahead of me. In this earth elemental plane, enemies truly were everywhere, so any loosening of vigilance could result in disaster. Where's Baofeng? Why hasn't he returned yet? As a hunter, scouting was basically his class's natural talent. Ever since we set up camp, I had him scout all around us, and he happily left for the task. He's back and is just crouching over there. He seems to be feeling downcast. Ran pointed at the half-dragon who was currently curled up into a ball and clutching his legs. That bastard had even curled his tail into the ball. At seeing this, I was surprised for a moment before I laughed out loud. Do you know what's going on? This is the first time I've ever seen Baofeng like this. When we were coming here, I was afraid that bastard would refuse to come, so I told him that we were going to the earth elemental plane where the creatures would be wondrously strange and the likes of which he's never seen before. He happily agreed upon hearing that and left those centaurs behind. Ren was surprised for a moment to hear this from me before coming to a sudden realization. So you fooled him into coming here? No wonder he's so depressed. I didn't lie to him one bit. This is the earth elemental plane. After all, those earth elemental creatures are indeed strange and wondrous. It's his fault for not asking clearly. He was getting too close to those centaurs and was getting involved in some scandals. It is a good opportunity for him to get away and calm down for a few days. Is this your so-called truthful lying? It's as amazing as I expected. Haha, but of course. I laughed, smug in satisfaction, as Ren seemed to learn much from me. She even took out a small notebook and noted this down while Adam behind us sneered at the sight. Yesterday, he was still complaining about how his own apprentice wronged him and how he shot himself in the foot. From how I see it, this will just be the same. Margaret, how about we have a little bet? I refuse to bet. Roland is 100% going to shoot himself in the foot again. He's a professional at doing so. If there's no doubt about it, how could we possibly bet? I decided to ignore the loud discussion behind my back, simply walking over to Baofeng. I decided to give him some encouragement since we still needed him to work for us. But right when I reached his side, I heard him muttering to himself. Even though their appearances are rather attractive, there are no holes. What should I do without any holes? Tooey. Right then and there I spat out all my saliva. This bastard even found elemental creatures attractive. He was completely unworthy of my pity. Cough, cough. I softly coughed twice and had already mentally prepared my next words, which would be true love is limitless, so this is no good. Baofeng, what happened to your true love? In order to tease him. But, he suddenly stood up, lifted his arms, and pointed his middle fingers at the dark gray sky. Damned heavens. You think this can stop me? Who cares if there are no holes? There's plenty of people that create holes when there are none to begin with. True love is limitless. True love is undefeatable. Ah! And then that half-dragon's depression instantly cleared up. He was filled with the will to battle as he rushed out while I remained there in a state of shock. Boom! But before he took many steps, a bolt of thunder crashed down on him, causing him to collapse, burned to a black crisp. I looked towards Margaret and Adam, thinking that they couldn't stand this anymore and cast a spell on Baofeng. However, everyone shook their heads, and even Candian made an exclamation of astonishment. There was no gathering of the thunder element at all, It was a pure natural lightning strike. A lightning strike actually appeared in the earth elemental plane. Is this the legendary heavenly tribulation? This is my first time witnessing it. The natural power of thunder was of course far stronger than anything a human mage could muster up, but the burnt half-dragon didn't surrender as he struggled to crawl up again and continued pointing his middle finger at the sky. Damned heavens! You shall never stop me from my true love. Boom. As Baofeng roared out in anger, he actually managed to agilely tumble on the ground and dodge a new lightning strike before running off into the distance. Boom. Ah. Boom. Ah. That burnt black warrior of true love was now emitting the tasty aroma of cooked meat as he stubbornly crawled off into the distance. True love is unstoppable. Boom. Ah. It seemed this was going to be a long ongoing battle about true love, or perhaps we wouldn't need to go hunting for lunch today. Chapter 207, The Deadline of 2 months. The weather in the earth elemental plane was quite unpleasant. At least 1/3 of each day would be spent amid sandstorms where nothing could be seen. The rather terrifying sounds of the sandstorms could be heard even in our underground caves. Of course, we had the ability to go out even in such weather, but many things would be impossible to accomplish outside. It was more effective to remain at camp and save our energy. There were many things to be done at camp as well. Some of us were adapting to the environment, some were polishing their swords, some simply slept, and someone had long since lost their patience. Ah, this is so frustrating. When will this annoying sandstorm finally stop? The heavy smell of earth in this plane makes me want to vomit. Let's hurry up and kill off Imradalorcan and go home already. Camdian, are you still not finished with your preparations? Are you still as weak and cowardly as always? I call it caution, my respectable Lady Alos. Before we get used to the nature of this earth elemental plane, our combat ability will be halved, especially for you whose powers are countered by earth. You'll probably be at even less than half. Meanwhile, Imradalorcan will have an endless amount of power to replenish himself, so we must first get accustomed to the nature of this plane. HMPH, how boring. I'm going to sleep, call me when the time is set. Alright, Lady Alos. I wish you sweet dreams. We were all rather surprised at how the two elemental gods talked to each other. Their personalities were completely opposite from what we had expected. Alos' icy and exquisite appearance had, in a way, fooled us. After being together for a short while, her icy beauty impression had vanished. Underneath her beauty that seemed like water was an impatient personality as wild as fire. Not only was the water elemental goddess like this, but based on my experience so far, all of the other elemental gods were similar in being the complete opposites of their elements' natures. According to common logic, fire mages will become easily angered and impatient, thunder and wind mages will become casual and free-spirited, water and ice mages will become easygoing and calm, while earth mages will become docile and honest. This should be the influence of the elements' own natures. Yet by just looking at the elemental gods before us, it could be seen that that could be no further from the truth. This is totally different from what everyone expected. The wind elemental god who should have been extremely free-spirited is actually the super cautious type. The water elemental goddess that should have been gentle and easygoing is actually a hot-tempered lady. And Imradalorcan who should have been docile and honest as the earth elemental god is actually a vicious, sly fox. Then what will the personality of the fire elemental goddess who should have been fiery and domineering be? I bet she's a little girl who loves peace and flowers. Fine then. A future coincidental meeting will help me discover that my worldview-shattering guess had actually been correct. Meanwhile, since we had time for idle chatter, when we asked what we were all thinking, Camdian helped explain things to us. The natures of our elements? Yes, it's true to begin with, and I wasn't such a cautious individual in the past. But after being cheated on the worst end of things for enough times, I became the cautious type. As for Lady Alos, all water elementals have mega slow personalities, so communicating with them could probably make anyone impatient. Staying in such an environment would probably change anyone into a slow personality themselves or change them into a mega impatient type like her. Imradalorcan's probably the same case. If it wasn't for how vicious and sly he could be, how could he possibly defeat the other veteran earth elementals and become the earth elemental god, living until today? It seemed that stories weren't always true. Even with innate natures, they couldn't compare to personalities shaped by later influences in life. This gossip was quite interesting to hear, but right now, I didn't have the time to consider other things. My own troubles were quite bothersome as well. Silver dignity, golden will? As I listened to the sandstorm outside, I sunk into deep contemplation. This time, the slaying a god quest had given me abundant rewards. Apart from that god equipment, Felix's hatred and various materials, my wallet was now filled with approximately 70,000 fate points. These points were definitely sufficient to exchange for some necessary skills and improve my overall rank to gold, but I was hesitating. Every rank had its foundational differences. Taking the next step without sufficient understanding would mean missing out on the path's necessary experience. Obtaining this experience later down the road would be impossible. It might even become a bottleneck for future progression. The gold rank was special among all the ranks. Just casually entering gold would definitely not be a wise idea. My system had planned my path for me before the gold rank, with levels 1 through 60. All the basic common job classes were present here, and there wasn't much difference between them. Most job classes commonly used combat techniques and skills would be mastered while still at the silver rank, and the main goal was to perfect one's mastery before changing fundamentally, finally transforming common and foundational abilities into personalized styles. I have to make a choice? It seems just sitting here in contemplation won't be enough. Any system of knowledge's steps for improvement would consist of going from only one skill to becoming a generalist, before going back from a generalist to a specialist. Cultivation was naturally the same. The iron and bronze ranks were for training the physical body and activating one's potential and talents, and at the silver rank, combat techniques and so on would be familiarized. After that, the physical body would no longer be able to be improved, and it was time to develop one's mental potential and combine everything they have learned, creating an internal world of their own. The next step would be for the person's individual internal world to be able to affect the outside world. That was the so-called golden will, and also the point where choice would have to be made. When a normal job class was cultivated to the limit, it would be time to choose a promoted class. And these promoted job classes, such as Beast King Hunter, Shadow Dancer and so on, were merely paths that strong people from the past had developed on their own. Following another's path would perhaps be a quick and easy progress, but there were no identical people in this world. Even twins with identical genes would have numerous differences between them, and someone else's path was always someone else's to begin with. It couldn't possibly be 100% appropriate for you. Walking down that path to a certain extent would always give rise to insurmountable obstacles. Of course, there were always exceptions, such as Ren. From a certain standpoint, she was basically a female clone of Carwin's, and all she needed to do was walk down the same path as him. With the exact same soul imprint supporting her, she would certainly reach an incredibly high level. As an aside, although the surgery to switch out Glena's blood was an incredible success, it wouldn't be possible to do the same with Ren. She had become Carwin's host once already and possessed a far stronger connection with the Chaos Abyss. Forcefully switching out her blood would be no different from switching her soul, not to mention that this would be interfering with one of Carwin's critical personal benefits, and he would almost certainly emerge and give me trouble, which was something I did not desire. And, so, the method I used for Ren was to slowly inject my fresh blood and use magic medicine to suppress Carwin's bloodline so that it wouldn't be too active. This was obviously no long-term solution, but I could only hope that Ren could find a way to break free on her own to separate herself from Carwin's. Only by cutting off the connection would she be able to free herself from the beckoning of the Chaos Abyss. Don't desire power from others. Improve your own techniques and willpower through continuous battle to create your own combat style. By the time I return, I hope to see a brand new you. Saying this, I kicked Ren away. Perhaps the Earth elemental plane wasn't suitable for living in, but it was definitely a great place for cultivation. In such a hostile environment, merely surviving would help one become stronger. Moreover, I haven't been giving Ren any of my blood recently. I was hoping that she could use her own willpower to resist the Chaos Abyss. This wasn't any type of strange strategy where a lion would push its baby lion down a cliff to strengthen the baby's body or anything like that. I've always felt that some animals' ways of raising their babies were incomprehensible. Did the ability to climb a cliff have anything to do with survival? Babies should be growing under their parents' care, learning techniques to hunt and growing stronger in body and mind. Kicking them off a cliff when they weren't even mature yet would cause either the baby lion to fall to death or starve to death. Cough. I seem to have gotten sidetracked again. Where was I? Oh right, why I wasn't injecting my blood. Actually, the reason was quite simple. I didn't want to die, and I wanted even less to die due to the strange reason of anemia. Back when I helped Gleena exchange her blood, I used up almost 1/3 of the blood in my body. This was already near the fatal limit for a normal person. I hadn't even regained my lost blood yet when I already helped Trin inject blood twice, so I've become incredibly anemic recently. Not even mentioning the headaches and dizziness, but whenever I woke up every morning, my blurry vision caused by anemia was basically impossible to deal with. I'd already mistaken Ren and Elisa for each other twice already and went into a few wrong places, causing some rather laughable incidents. Your vision is blurry? That's why you were naked in the morning and running around out in public for all to see? To use such an excuse, you must think we're all little children. Let me explain. At the time, I was just dazedly following a procession to go to the showering halls, and when I heard them saying they were going to take off their clothes, I thought that we reached the showers already, but who knew? Who knew? Who knew that you actually followed Eaglestorm and Xuiti's procession and you guys all started taking off your clothes right in public? When I discovered what was going on, it was already too late. I'm not someone who can't be saved. Yep, you saved yourself. You stole a bystander's clothes and then walked back home all proudly. However, when she got to this point, Elisa glared at me coldly and adjusted her eyeglasses. The icy condescension in her eyes was humiliating. You ended up robbing a lady's clothes instead. Not only did you wear some lacy female clothing home, but you even had a lady stay by herself in an alley, naked, for half an hour. Do you know how much effort we spent on convincing the witnesses that they saw Princess Rin who was intending to change her style rather than an insane His Highness Roland? For the newly created Observers Squad to go all out for such a first mission is nothing more than utter humiliation. I couldn't reply to Elisa at the time. Back then, I was so dizzy and couldn't see anything, so I could only dart into an alley. It was so difficult to catch anyone at all, so how could I care about anything else? But that doesn't seem right. Although I couldn't see the person's face at the time, I remembered that person had a muscular body. Wasn't she actually a man, a muscular man? That person also happily gave me their clothing. She's one of Omar's good friends, one of the core members of the muscle-loving club. To be honest, she kept viewing this incident with pride, and if it weren't for us stopping her, she would probably go around bragging to everyone about her female charisma. If that happened, your reputation isn't important, but if you got us dragged into it. Alright, seeing everyone approach me with evil intentions, all I could do was clutch my head, crouch, and then shout out loudly, "Don't hit my face." Recalling back to the beating I received from everyone that morning, my cheek started twinging. Elisa really didn't hold back at all on me, even though I clearly told her to not hit my face. There was no helping it. Thanks to my prior experiences, injecting any more of my blood into Ren would be impossible until I at least recovered completely. I could only count on her own willpower. After saying goodbye to Ren, it was also time for me to get going. This wasn't only a place for their cultivation, but it was also the place I chose for my personal cultivation as well. Rather than staying inside and considering my future combat style and development path, let's just use actual combat to test things out instead. In order to reach the peak, I had never considered the already created higher-ranked job classes. My path to gold had to belong to me alone, and since the mortal planes situation was now somewhat studied, I finally had some time to consider my personal future. If it were someone else, using such a short period of time to complete the foundational change from silver to gold would be impossible, but I had countless amounts of combat experience and knowledge to back me up. And this wasn't even mentioning my system's fate points, which would help increase the speed and effectiveness of my cultivation. These 2 months of actual combat training would be enough for me to finish walking down this path. Alright, everyone, see you all in 2 weeks. And so, this temporary team split up for the time being as everyone prepared in their own way for combat as according to our plans. Immortal Lorcan would definitely be difficult to deal with. The Earth Elemental God was now in his home plane, and he could use the earth elemental plane's power as he pleased to strengthen himself, making himself nigh undefeatable. If it weren't for the fact that Immortal Lorcan was obviously heavily injured and that he was in a state of hibernation to help himself recover, there was no way I would follow him all the way here. Even so, dealing with the heavily injured Immortal Lorcan was no easy matter. As visitors from another plane, we needed time to get used to the natural laws of this world. This was especially more so for the wind and water elemental gods Cambion and Delos. Before they could finally get used to the earth elemental plane, they'd likely be able to use less than half of their actual power. The others were the same as well. How well a mage performed on the battlefield depended on how much preparation was done beforehand. Amelia and Margaret both wanted time to prepare for combat and the scene of combat beforehand, placing traps and creating cannon fodder. Their 2 months would be very busy. And it was the same for me, Adam, and Ren. While we would make the most of these 2 months to increase our overall capabilities, we also needed to get used to fighting in the earth elemental plane. The 2 months would likely pass by in a flash for us. There was one more person, cough, let's just forget about him, okay? What? I absolutely have to talk about him? Fine then, don't regret it. That fellow's gentlemanly, undying body was perhaps already cultivated to the highest level. Even after receiving such a heavenly tribulation, he recovered quickly and left our camp without returning. Margaret had indeed stayed in contact with him and was aware of what Baofeng was up to. Yet judging by the look of disgust on Margaret's face, when she was always the expressionless type to begin with, I decided not to ask what happened. Baofeng said he can convince a group of fighters to come over and help us. I believe he can most likely accomplish it. Okay, although this was a piece of good news, I couldn't be happy about it at all since I really didn't want to know how he was going to do it. Nor did I want to guess. At this moment, for the first time, I started regretting having Baofeng come here and assist us. Soon enough, with help from Margaret's random teleportation, I put on a tan woolen cape and thick dwarven anti-wind goggles as I began my own journey of cultivation. Oh my, what a passionate host you are! Before I even steadied myself after the random teleportation spell, the entire ground began shaking. A piece of land suddenly sunk into the ground, and a scorpion-shaped monster crawled out. It was only slightly smaller than a dragon in size. The scorpion's plating seemed to be as hard as iron, and its barbed tail seemed to be gathering energy, while the hundreds of eyeballs on its tiny head were all staring at me with an obvious murderous intent. You discovered me from my footsteps? Oh man, it seems the next 2 months will be quite difficult. Even though I said so, I laughed out loud in joy. I haven't enjoyed the simple feeling of battle in so long. Little scorpion, let me have some fun with you. Chapter 208, An Old Acquaintance and the City of Sand. The secrets of the elemental planes? I don't know either. You should go find the mages for information instead. Why are you acting so surprised? Even I, Ayer, am not someone who knows everything. If it seems like I have a lot of knowledge, that's only because I've had such a long life. The history of the 4 elemental planes is even greater than that of the mortal plane. The goddess of creation Ike had used them as the foundation for creating all the other planes, and I wasn't even born yet at the time. How could I possibly know? When I asked Ayer about the ancient secrets of the elemental planes, I received such an unexpected answer. And when he mentioned the goddess of creation, the black-clothed icy death god was actually filled with a nostalgic expression. The 4 elemental gods may have a pretty name, but they're really nothing more than warehouse managers working for the goddess of creation. Ike entrusted them with the power to control part of the very elemental planes themselves, but they definitely do not possess the power to truly rule over the elemental planes. Nobody is able to rule over any elemental plane, as that would mean that that individual has the power to rule over 1/4 of the entire world and its living creatures. And when I checked this information from other sources as well, Margaret gave it to me in a friendly gesture, it also proved the veracity of Ayer's words. The most obvious evidence, however, was that when the 4 elemental gods were sealed, the elemental planes still existed and went on as usual. If an elemental god were to die, a new elemental god would nationally be born again in just a few hundred years. Theoretically speaking, the goddess of chaos Cynthia inherited part of this power from her mother Ike. Cynthia would be able to control the 4 elemental gods and indirectly control these planes, Synthesia was still affecting the elemental planes, which was why the Earth elemental plane displayed many traits of chaos. The Earth elemental plane was far different from what most people thought of it. This wasn't a world devoid of nothing other than sandstorms and earth elementals, but it was rather the opposite. As the most ancient elemental plane of the four, its natural resources and specialties were incredibly abundant. Various ancient species continued to reproduce successfully here, and precious gems and rare minerals were commonplace. Buried under the ancient hills were valuables that would be impossible to find in any other plane. Of course, the most common type of resident here were elemental creatures related to the earth, but they were different from the humanoid elementals in the mortal plane. The earth elementals here weren't accustomed to humanoid shapes. Their shapes were, instead, wondrously strange and abnormal. Some took the form of dragons while some were typical stone giants. There were also giant crabs or insect-shaped elementals. Typically, they would choose to imitate strong existences that they had seen before. Although they boasted of differences in appearances and species, they all possessed one thing in common: all these creatures were part earth elemental, and had the ability to devour each other and evolve into stronger existences. According to stories, in the very beginning, Imrudalorcan had been a weak stone giant. Because this place had a high amount of elemental power, the body parts of these elemental creatures made for excellent magical materials. Any place with benefits to be gained would attract intelligent species. If there were enormous benefits to be reaped, it was only natural that there would be those looking to strike it big while not fearing death. After the warehouse manager elemental gods were sealed, these elemental planes were just like warehouses with their doors left unlocked and wide open. There were numerous methods to invade them. Various factions had already set up their own permanent outposts in each of the elemental planes. In an area known as the Cairo Hills was the outpost of the Mage Country, Ain Rodent. Hundreds of mage towers and magic contraptions created a defensive energy field, and the semicircular dark purple magic barrier blocked all the sandstorms from being able to affect Cairo City. Cairo was also the largest non-native settlement in the Earth elemental plane for the nearest several thousand kilometers. Various species could be seen walking in Cairo's streets. Although most were still humans, elves, beastmen, and other common species from the mortal plane, there were also some demons from the lower planes. You could even see a few machine life forms or ethereal life forms from other worlds. Of course, there were also gnome merchants that could be found literally everywhere. However, there was one species among them that was one of the rarest to be found in the mortal planes: half-elementals. They always had complex reasons for coming into existence. Some were the descendants of high-level elementals and ordinary species, while some had been ordinary species elementalized by the elemental plane, but their most obvious traits were their physical appearances. Their skin colors would always be rather eye-catching, with speckled, tan skin, or fiery red skin, not to mention that they typically had various crystals embedded in their faces. Their appearances could be rather frightening, yet due to their body's partial elementalization, they were also natural-born elemental mages. They had excellent innate element sensing abilities, and with just a little training they would always be able to become superb elemental mages. They didn't even have to worry about their element's magic turning on themselves. They always grew quickly in power. For the Mage Country, apart from all the special resources to be gained here, the Earth elemental plane's half-elementals were excellent seeds that could join their ranks. As for the Earth magic archmages, the Earth elemental plane's high concentration of Earth element density was the best cultivation location for them of all. With all sorts of rare elemental creatures and resources here, how could they possibly give up on coming to such a location? But, recently, Cairo had met with some trouble. The Earth elemental god had returned. These uninvited guests finally had to face the homeowner. Obviously, Imrudalorcan, who is still the master of this plane in name, wouldn't allow his home to have uninvited guests. More and more Earth elemental creatures suddenly changed their attitude towards Cairo, and attacks by elemental beasts were becoming more frequent. Due to the elemental tide's increase and the return of Imrudalorcan, the sandstorms became stronger in magnitude as well. Cairo's magic barrier was keeping out the sandstorms by now using 50% more energy than the same time last year. This won't be good if it continues. It was becoming harder and harder to travel to and from the Earth elemental plane, and the magic power required to move between planes and the magic upkeep of Cairo kept increasing as well. As a half-elemental archmage who was born and raised in the earth elemental plane, Atadia had much on his plate to worry about. Dozens of years ago, Atadia had joined the mage country and became an acolyte, and now, he was a gold rank archmage. Atadia couldn't be more familiar with the city of Cairo, but recently, he kept feeling more and more uncomfortable, as if this beautiful city filled with the culture of magic was a restraint upon him. Somewhere in the wilderness, there was a will that was summoning him, and it wasn't limited to only him. In the past 3 months, there were over a dozen acolytes that disappeared into the sandstorms, leaving only their mage robes and staves behind. Imrda Lorcan? How troublesome. As a gold-ranked archmage, Atadia was no novice and aware of what was going on. The only existence that could influence the entire earth elemental plane to such a degree could only be that legendary earth elemental god. Since Atadia was no weakling, he could still resist the summoning in his soul, but those novice acolytes found it impossible to resist. Every half-elemental was precious, and losing them like this was painful for him. Yet this wasn't even the biggest problem. 2 days ago, an acolyte had gone wild and actually rushed into the magic mechanism area, attempting to break the magic barrier device, which was rather shocking. There's still no response from our mage country? They should at least send us a few more archmages to help control the situation. No. The mage country has also met with its own trouble. The Bardi Empire suddenly started a series of small conflicts with us, and most of our strongest mages have left for the front lines. From what I gleaned through my personal channels, similar problems are occurring in the wind and water elemental planes. Add on the fact that transport and travel between the elemental planes keep increasing in difficulty, and perhaps not only will we not receive more aid, but will probably even receive less assistance than usual. If there's a problem with the current dimensional traveling, then can't we borrow the gnomes' dimensional traveling services? Their time-space tearing devices should still be usable, right? Their 20% fixed rate of failure is just too much. It's still okay to transport resources, but it's too dangerous to use for anything living. Also, those gnomes recently changed their rules, and have actually been making us purchase insurance. Otherwise, they won't transport anything for us, and any losses incurred won't be paid by them. Insurance? What's that? Something that's been getting popular recently among the gnomes. It seems to have been spread by the underground gnomes. That's a system where you pay a certain amount to the gnomes as a deposit, and if an accident occurs where you incur losses, the gnomes will pay you for your losses. Isn't that a good thing? Then you might as well buy it. We've always sucked up any losses ourselves in the past. The problem is that even if we purchase their insurance, they wouldn't give us any money back. The Archmage Edwin in charge of dimensional transportation has been incredibly angered by them recently. Why's that? Don't the gnomes always stress a merchant's honesty? They claim that we put special magnetic items into the products we were transporting, which affected the dimensional teleportation. They are saying that we were at fault for the failed teleportation, and even requested that we pay them for their losses. What the hell? If certain special items can't be teleported, shouldn't they tell us beforehand? Only telling us after the fact, then what about the next time? I doubt that Archmage Edwin would let them use that excuse again. The second time we had even worse luck. We met with a dimensional storm, and half our resources were lost. This time, the gnomes should have paid up. No, they didn't, because their insurance contact had an additional clause stating, losses caused by uncontrollable outside factors will not be paid by us. A dimensional storm is a natural disaster and is counted as such an uncontrollable outside factor. Then why are we still purchasing that insurance or whatever? Isn't it just a merchant's trap? Aren't we buying it just in case we incur losses during the teleportation? Yeah, we only found out about it after being on the suffering end. In order to receive payment for our losses during teleportation, we were supposed to buy a special teleportation insurance. In the end, for the third attempt, Archmage Edwin ended up signing every single additional insurance option. Don't tell me we were on the losing end again? Would the gnomes actually go against their own contract? This time the gnomes' time-space tearing device actually exploded, which was when we learned that in such a situation, we need to purchase an additional accidental explosion insurance, otherwise there are still no reparations for us. Just buy it then, why don't you just buy all the insurance? But the problem is that the explosion insurance is more expensive than all the other insurances added together. But, as everyone knows about gnome products, not having explosion insurance is basically equal to no insurance. Archmage Edwin was so angry that he ended up getting a stroke. Atadia's mouth was wide agape and he was rendered speechless, but this wasn't the end. The mage acolyte giving him the report had an expression of not knowing whether to laugh or cry as he continued. The gnome merchants in our city have also learned these techniques, and are selling all sorts of insurance. Recently, there have been many half-elementals going missing, right? Those gnomes even made an insurance for in case they go missing, and they're especially targeting young acolytes for this insurance. They're spreading stories about the disappearances all over, making people worried for their own safety. Did they pay out any money? There's no need to answer, I've already guessed it. They definitely didn't pay. Your wisdom could light up the skies. Indeed, those damn swindling merchants didn't pay a single copper coin. They actually said that the insured person himself needed to request the insurance payment. Since those people have all gone missing, how could they possibly request payment? Suddenly, a needling high-pitched voice sounded from behind Atadia and the mage acolyte. Hello, I'm from the Alien Gnome Insurance Company. Have you heard of us? Atadia turned around to see a short gnome wearing extravagant clothing, all smiles with a business bag in his tiny hand. Do you know? There's been a gang of kidnappers going around lately, causing the disappearance of many half-elementals. But our Alien Gnome Insurance Company specializes in this field, and we have set up several. I don't know which type of insurance you need, but if you're not satisfied, get the hell out. Atadia, who was always well known for being a friendly individual, was angered to the point of roaring, but the gnome salesman still didn't intend to give up. Hell insurance? We have that as well. Although I don't know why this strange insurance request has been so popular lately, our customers are the gods. You go to hell, we'll pay up. In Cairo's Archmage Conference, the epic-ranked Archmage Cade had an expression filled with worry as well. As the highest-ranking Archmage in Cairo, he knew far more about what was going on than his subordinates. As a true top-level Archmage, the controllers of Truth's information network would always remember to give him a personal report, so of course he knew that the situation in Ike was changing at a rapid pace. Especially with regards to the conflict between his mage country and the Bardi Empire. It was no small conflict at all. If it wasn't dealt with properly, it would become an all-out new war. The mage country's support could no longer be counted on, as the worsening environment in the Earth elemental plane indicated the return of the legendary threat known as Lorcan. And, they were also dealing with internal problems as well. Teacher, those damned gnomes are getting worse every day. They're spreading rumors everywhere and causing people to panic, and not only that, they've recently begun increasing prices on basic goods and getting rich off of our country's disaster. We should exile them. For Atadia, who was typically the calm type to be angered to such a degree, it seemed that the gnomes had indeed gone overboard this time. Then we'll just starve to death. 70% of the business done here is by the gnomes. Perhaps you could teach us how to create bread with magic? Another mage, Sorrento, remained calm as usual, but his sarcasm made Atadia rather displeased. If you think the gnomes are difficult to deal with, that's only because you're too simple-minded. HMPH, then our resident genius Sorrento will surely be able to deal with those greedy misers. Fine then, how about you go have a discussion with the gnomes about the recent problem of the increase in food prices? I'm unable to do it either. But that doesn't mean that nobody's capable of the task. I recommend a certain person that's actually able to get the upper hand in negotiating with the gnomes. The gnomes have contracts that have more than 50 clauses and 7 or 8 pages, yet that guy's contracts are actually thicker than books, with over 800 clauses. Just his talking can cause the gnomes to go into a daze. Recently, he's been making money by having special negotiations with the gnomes. Now, wherever he appears, those misers will directly surrender and pay up. Sorrento's words astonished the other two present archmages. A human able to gain the upper hand in a business negotiation with the sly gnomes was incomprehensible and unheard of. Is he a major merchant from somewhere? No, he seems to be a wandering adventurer, and gnome negotiation is just his side job whenever he happens to be in Cairo. Most of the time, he's out hunting, And while his power level isn't much to speak of, he's a rather lucky one. What do you mean? He's obviously nothing more than at the silver rank, but the first time he came to Cairo he actually had an Emperor Scorpion's poison stinger on him. That's a strong creature that even gold-ranked warriors wouldn't dare face alone. Perhaps he hid his true power level. For someone to be out there by himself, it wouldn't be strange. At first, that's what we thought as well. But Archmage Aru, who specializes in divination magic, met him personally, and there's no mistaking that he really is just at the silver rank. But what's even more astonishing is what happened later. The second time he returned to Cairo, he had an Earth Elemental Lord's crystal core with him. That's something that no gold-ranked warrior would be able to deal with. And every time after that, he keeps bringing back stronger and stronger monster materials, in a shorter and shorter time, and… Sorrento intentionally paused here, apparently trying to make everyone curious. Seeing how his master and all his senior brothers were watching him, he was satisfied and continued with his tale. The last time he returned to Cairo, he brought back a twice-evolved Magic Mountain Giant's heart. Magic Mountain Giants already require gold-ranked warriors to deal with, and if it's a twice-evolved one, maybe not even a legend would suffice. How is it possible? That's an evolved mountain giant that has limitless power in this environment. Even I would have to be careful dealing with one. This time, it was Cade's turn to be shocked. Does he have a team to support him? How would that be possible? It's just him alone coming back to Cairo each time to eat and sleep, and would he have his team stay outside and eat sand? Besides, detection magic indicates that every time he goes out, he directly heads for the highly dangerous areas, while his prey always has nothing more than some ice damage and cut wounds. He should be a magical swordsman of the ice element. Ice damage? There's almost zero water element present in this plane, so he's still able to cause ice damage to the earth elemental creatures in this place where ice magic has minimal power? This was even more incomprehensible. Archmage Cade started getting interested in this rumored person. Arrange a meeting for me with this person, I'm getting rather curious. Oh right, what's his name? Roland. Although his nickname seems to be Blackhand Roland. When he heard this, Cade stood up with an expression filled with surprise and disbelief. A dozen seconds later, he finally shook his head. If it's him, anything is indeed possible. Hurry up and arrange a meeting with him for me as soon as possible. Forget it, I'll personally go find him. You guys should come with me as well. If he's who I think he is, he might be your teacher's senior. Chapter 209, Chicken Meatball Flavored. With sandstorms and stone pillars everywhere, this was the home of the earth elementals. However, based on the fundamental countering between the elements, wherever there was an excess of the earth element, there would naturally be less of the water element. Not only were sources of water priceless, but this place also lacked any traces of ice or water magic. Using water or ice element magic in this earth elemental plane with imbalanced elements was no different from forcibly trying to cause artificial rain to fall in a desert. Not only would the difficulty be greatly magnified, but its might would also significantly decrease, and this power drop had nothing to do with personal strength. The stronger the mage, the more one would need to borrow power from nature, and the strongest forbidden curses were nothing more than the products of synchronizations between people and nature. This all meant that ice and water mages were weakened more than anyone else here. This was also why most of the mages in Cairo City were earth mages. In such an environment, their cultivation would be far easier, and their actual power levels would be greatly increased. As for the strange concept of training in harsh environments and placing large burdens on yourself while training, this was more suitable for muscular warriors. Magic was an academic technique which required precision and logic, where a kingdom could be lost for want of a nail. Getting used to an environment where the mage's element was rare would not only not be beneficial, it would actually cause the mage's elemental power to weaken due to a long period of cultivation in an area lacking the mage's element. If everyone could simply transform into powerful legends simply by living in areas of low magical power rather than moving to areas of high magical power, well, that would be more suitable for some tale's heroic main character. If it was possible in real life, then wouldn't everyone turn into superheroes and all acolytes turn into archmages with the coming of the elemental tide? Yet, sometimes, the world was simply illogical. In this earth elemental plane where ice, snow, rain, and water were almost non-existent, there was currently a patch of abnormally frozen corpses. It was a group of vicious and sly-burrowing mantle spiders. They typically lived underground for long periods of time and excelled in hunting prey with ambushes and traps. When walking by, innocent people and even magical beasts would be bitten on the legs and dragged underground, where the spider's 16 sharp stone fangs would rip them apart. However, these dangerous existences were all lying dead on the ground, with only minuscule wounds to be seen on their bodies. What killed them was the fatal icy chill that had entered their wounds. And, right now, I was rather annoyed, not because of the enemy creatures before me, but rather, ugh, how disgusting. I had made a temporary barbecue rack and had just taken a hunk of mantle spider leg. After heating it up and skinning it, there was actually some snow-white meat underneath all the thick layers of earth and spider shell. However, cooking it produced only a disgusting aroma of lime powder. Chewy, chewy, chewy. I failed again. Even though I said so, I still furrowed my eyebrows and continued chewing. You have now tasted your 64th abnormal delicacy. You still lack 36 more to go for your food god. Nothing is off limits achievement. You also lack 9,936 more to go for the he who stands at the top of the food chain achievement. However, since this creature has 16 feet, it doesn't count for your we eat everything with 4 legs except tables and chairs achievement. And since this creature's taste doesn't quite reach even half of the legendary taste the sky achievement, it will not count for that one, either. Please keep trying harder, sigh. This achievement seems so difficult to achieve. I have to find something with 4 legs that tastes even more disgusting. Chewy. Am I stupid? I don't want to get that damned achievement. Yep, I never had any type of abnormal collection habits. I understood that my system's achievements had always made suffer since long ago. Either the achievements would indeed be useful and the process of obtaining it be ridiculous, or I would receive one without even realizing it, but there would be painful side effects. At any rate, the system wouldn't be happy unless I was suffering. I've already checked all these achievements and requirements for obtaining them. I was rather interested in the one called He Who Stands at the Top of the Food Chain. Epic achievement, He Who Stands at the Top of the Food Chain. After consuming 10,000 living or non-living foods that no normal person would eat, you shall receive the honorable title of Bear Grylls, Devourer of the Void. Equipping this will cause you to seem more threatening to all living creatures, and it will give you the ability Bear Grylls Glare. Any targets under this effect will feel as if they have met their mortal enemy or natural counter and will be unable to move for a short while. A friendly reminder from your system, this skill has a special effect on Baofeng. Another friendly reminder from your system, that's right, I have long since stopped treating Baofeng as human. Well, I understood what the system meant when it said Baofeng was unhuman. As for this additional skill, it was a practical one. After all, combat between high-level warriors could be decided in just an instant. Being able to paralyze the enemy with just a stare and immobilize him was just like the petrifying gaze of a Medusa. It would be an incomparably useful skill. Yet, from another standpoint, the better the ability, the more ridiculous the requirements to achieve it. Just how long was it supposed to take me to eat 10,000 food objects? Not to mention that they had to be food that no normal person would think of eating. It was basically a marathon straight to hell, and I normally wouldn't even consider it. I ate 64 abnormal creatures in the short space of a month for only one reason: hunger. All the rations I had originally taken to the Earth Elemental Plane had already perished during my continuous battles. These strange Earth Elemental creatures were always sizable and had large area of effect attacks, such as a huge jaw appearing out of nowhere and engulfing you, which would attack my entire body. My skin was tough and it wasn't a problem, but it wasn't the same for my clothing. If it weren't for the fact that I could replenish additional clothing at Cairo, perhaps I would be able to complete another achievement for my system regarding the number of times I ran around naked. Even so, if it weren't for Arabella's ice armor protecting my body, I would probably end up naked most of the time. However, even if I saved face, there was nothing I could do about my hunger. After all, it would be too inefficient to go back to Cairo every few kilometers, so I could only imitate Bear Grylls and eat whatever I found, grinding my achievement along the way. Well, the hungry enough to eat literally anything achievement was actually surprisingly useful. After equipping it, It doubled my stomach's capacity as well as increased my resistance against poisonous and disgusting foods, which was the only reason I could even tolerate eating all these disgusting things. Wah! This tastes like both wax and limestone, it's so horrible. Something so disgusting isn't even at half the level of Taste the Sky? Just how horrible is British cooking supposed to be? I can tell you quite clearly that it's still quite far off. If you're willing to spend 100 fate points, I can exchange it for an original flavored Taste the Sky for you to try. It's definitely delicious. Never. I refuse to believe you. I still remember the last time. Suffering once was already enough. If I was dumb enough to make the same mistake twice, then I would truly be a fool. The last time I thought about exchanging for food through my system, the result was that even though those fried noodles seemed oh so delicious on the surface, the moment I ate it I ended up fainting. When I woke up, I discovered that all sections of my achievement progress had increased by 1, which probably meant that my soul had gone on vacation to the river Styx for an entire day. I'm going to have to depend on myself. That thing over there seems to resemble a lizard, so it's probably edible. Big lizard, wait for me. 3 days later, a legend-ranked sand dragon's heart was put up for sale in Cairo's market. These underground semi-dragons had astonishing power, as not only were they extremely quick at burrowing into the ground, but they were also skilled at summoning sandstorms and were incredibly difficult to deal with. In just an instant, that sand dragon's heart sold for an incredibly high price, but I had only one review for it. So crispy. Tastes like chicken. I'm going to go find another dozen, for me to choose to cultivate in the earth elemental plane. It would doubtlessly be the most foolish decision possible if I had been a pure ice mage. However, for me, who had the system, increasing my power level was never going to be a problem. The critical part was to develop a personal path that was the most suitable for me. Purposefully absorbing a large amount of earth element into my body would be nothing but slow suicide for any other ice or water element mage. However, it was just a grand gamble for me, a critically important gamble that would influence my future development. Create, Ice Mountain Sword. Recreate, Wall of Eternal Ice. Chapter 210, Drawing a New World. I still remembered when the Lion King Frigid Nightmare had asked me, in the snowy mountain, what my most fundamental magic was and how I learned of magic. I had laughed out loud at the time. I've already found it, it's always been by my side. My magic is to draw my mental world, in which case all I need is a paintbrush. That's right, after reobtaining the Ice Shredder's soul imprint, my path of ice and snow was quite clear now. I would follow nature, imitate nature, recreate nature, and surpass nature. Fundamental magic, ice and snow brush. Materializing the ice element and changing its form was just a basic level snow and ice sculpting technique, which every mage knew how to use. After all, before tossing out any ice shards, you would have to at least make them sharp enough to harm others. Ice magic wasn't the only one to have this basic spell. All elemental magic, as well as other types of magic and techniques, had the same concept. Using magic to control the elements to create a stone wall or an ice sculpture is something that perhaps any acolyte could accomplish. Yet I doubt any of those novices know how much really goes into the magic. After all they're doing is imitating what they've learned as they utter the incantations and pay the required amount of mana. As for how magic fundamentally works, I doubt any of them would think too much of it. Elemental sculpting? The most basic elemental spell with 0 attack power? Ha. It seems we've met an incredible apprentice. We thought that we'd meet yet another idiot who was allured by high level magic and would choose some strong attack magic. Yep. I definitely wasn't talking about my first generation partner. He may have been an idiot, but he was a nice guy. I still remembered how when I had chosen elemental sculpting, those old weirdos were laughing so happily, as if I had done something amazing. Elemental sculpting may be simple, but it was the foundational magic for every other type of magic out there. It was only the simplest rearranging of the elements, and by itself, it basically had 0 attack power. Yet I still had unhesitatingly chosen it. Controlling magic, synchronizing it with the elements in nature, communicating with the elements, calculating the shape desired, transmitting your will into creating the shape, paying the required amount of mana, gathering the attracted element, arranging it into the necessary shape, and completing the sculpture are the basic steps for normal elemental sculpting. But if it's to be used as a fundamental magic, it must be like an instinct. Only one step is necessary, telling the element what you want. The rest will all be skipped. I extended my arms and caused formless female ice fairies to appear. The moment they appeared, they started frowning with their delicate eyelashes. It was obvious that the thick earth element here made it difficult for them to breathe. This was no environment they enjoyed being in. Yet, under my willpower, they still began to dance and create the scene in my mind. These ethereal fairies showed their true forms in the air. 1, 2, 10, a horde. Countless numbers. The ice fairies on the outer circle began creating an isolated area, while the dancing ice fairies in the middle were dripping with silvery white light and created a huge ice river where the droplets fell. These crystal clear fairies weren't true existences. They were creations of the combination of my magic and the ice element. In the past, I could only use forbidden spells to see them, but now, casting my fundamental magic required their aid. They were a source that even fundamental magic couldn't reach. A massive ice mountain suddenly appeared in this windy and sandy location. Before this mountain, even a mountain giant was nothing more than a dwarf. Unlike its image in my mind, this was an actual, real ice mountain. Even in the mortal plane, I would be unable to create such a large ice mountain. The speed of fundamental magic meant that I would conserve a large amount of mana, which was the only way I could create such a large ice mountain domain. Since I now have the paint and brush, let's begin drawing. For a silver ranked mage to do all this would be considered unbelievable, but for me, this was just the beginning. What I was about to do next was the second reason I needed to be far away from the prying eyes of the gods. Now, then, let's create a world that belongs only to me. Recreate, wall of frozen earth. I chose to reincarnate to cultivate again rather than fixing up my phylactery, mostly because the semi-god undead was limited in potential, and my future opponents were far too strong. With the onset of the elemental tide, invaders from various planes would revisit the mortal plane and enjoy the holy war. But the most difficult part to deal with of all would be the revival of those ancient gods. Forget about the others, no matter how strong they are. I can at least attempt something. If the two highest goddesses of chaos and order revive, no, they don't even need to revive. If they only send out a part of their will, all we could probably do is watch and helplessly laugh. Yep, I considered it. If my plan still had any holes in it, it would be that the two goddesses of chaos and order ended up reviving, or if they noticed that something was wrong and forced themselves to revive prematurely even at the cost of injuring themselves. And what would happen in that scenario? Who cares? We'd just all die in 3 seconds flat. After all, even I can't block a casual attack from them, even if they're currently weakened. This has nothing to do with power levels. After all, they're the children of the goddess of creation, the true rulers of this world. They were born with this special power. That was what Ayer had said when he mentioned how he wouldn't be able to stand up to them for even 3 seconds. He had such a relaxed expression, as if he had accepted this long ago. For me, however, even if their power was impossible to resist against as I expected, once I finally truly confirmed that their powers were high to the point of completely being helpless, I still felt bitter inside. After all, if a plan had a critical flaw from the very start, it would cause anyone to despair. And in that future, there was nobody that could stop the revival of the two goddesses, which ended up causing the world's catastrophe. I created this world, and her power was inherited by the order and chaos goddesses. That meant that any life, concept, or item born whatsoever either belonged to chaos or order, with 0 exceptions. That meant that all residents of this world were utilizing this world's power. For the two goddesses, it was no different from using fire to attack a fire elemental, simply meaningless. Then, did this mean that they were truly undefeatable? Perhaps, for everyone else, this was true. I, however, still denied it. I wasn't the soul from this world, nor was I obeying the cycle of reincarnation. Even if there was a natural law in this world that made the attacks of this world's residents ineffective against the goddess of creation, my soul wasn't from this world to begin with. The power of law I created was destined to be their natural counter. Yet just this alone wouldn't be enough. The power of law tended towards protection and was chaos among order. Only having the power to defend wouldn't give me any chances at victory. If it could be considered a solid shield, I still required a sharp sword, one that could threaten even the highest of all gods. How to find something that was even more powerful than the goddess of creation was destined to be an unsolvable paradox. Yet what I excelled at the most was to find a solution when there was supposed to be none. At this moment, even if there was clearly no correct solution in front of me, I was still going to forcibly create one of my own. If I didn't mind that I would have to use crooked methods and devious means, then there was indeed an answer. If I can't find anything in this world, then I'll just have to create a new world. Yep, even I myself found it unbelievable, but I was indeed intending to challenge the goddess of creation's right to create worlds. You're literally insane. Hey, you just learned this? Alright then, just mentioning this very idea of mine made Ayer think that I had gone insane, but since my enemy was the highest goddess of all, who had created this entire world, any normal method would be ineffective from the very start. No normal person would even think of challenging the chaos and order goddesses. If I went about it with insanity from the very start, perhaps I might have a slim chance at victory. How to create a world? I don't know either. Fine then, this was a far too difficult process for me, but I could imitate the true goddess of creation of this world, Ike. Since her power separated into the two powers of order and chaos, then did that mean I could comprehend Ike herself as the combination of order and chaos? In that case, could I understand it as the goddess of creation requiring both powers and identities as part of chaos and order? And that her soul couldn't be a part of this world she created herself, in order to prevent being bound to it? When I came up with this conclusion, my first reaction was instead to, System, be honest with me, did you plot this from the very beginning? Why did you provide me with this physical body containing two different types of powers? No, I should say, why did you entice me into choosing this physical body? Remembering back to that scene, this physical body and the other available bodies were completely on different levels, and the points required were just perfect, so choosing this one seemed only natural. And when I saw Ayer again after that, he even exclaimed, I have no idea how you recovered to having such a body with just so little blood left, it's truly amazing, just like the goddess of creation's power. But my question only received a mysterious response. Alright, I won't comment on why it's obviously refusing to answer but still gave me an ellipsis. It's basically just trying to say there is no treasure buried here when there really was, but from a certain standpoint, its silent admittance definitely caused me to sense a plot. But before I could challenge it or threaten it by saying I wasn't going to do anything anymore, my system spoke up first. We're on the same side, and our goal is the same. You die, I die. You live, I live. In the end, the system was serious for once in a rare occurrence. It answered me using the standpoint of its personal survival. Even if it didn't directly answer what I asked, its intention was obvious. I won't say the specifics, but we're on the same side, so I didn't do wrong by you this time. Rather the opposite, this selection was correct all along, and your guess is also correct. Of course, I couldn't be satisfied with such a vague response. However, the system had accompanied me for over 300 years already, and I still hadn't found any methods to make it materialize so I could beat it up. In the end, I could only helplessly accept it. Alright, after resolving the question of how to go about being a creator, what was remaining was just how to create, and what to create. What to create was decided from the very start. Of course, I would create the scenery which left the deepest impression in my soul. That frozen Northlands was the home in my heart. Transforming it into my creation was my only choice to begin with. And as for how to create it, that was even easier. All I had to do was imitate Ike. Ike used the four elements to create the world, and those four elements were supplied by the four elemental planes. The four elemental planes' history was even longer than the chaos and order goddesses, and directly using elemental power was even one of chaos powers. However, using the power of the four elements to create a new world was outside of the two goddesses' divine powers. I didn't need to create a true new world. All I needed to do was create my mental world of the infallible Defender here again, as well as recreate the northern frozen plains that were etched into my soul. Just creating a small isolated world would be enough. Perhaps this isolated world would become an existence that could even threaten the goddesses of chaos and order. Perhaps, As long as I could pull the two goddesses into this isolated world, we'd have a chance at victory. Perhaps this isolated world would be able to cancel out their divine obligations and cut them off from the limitless power supplied to them by the world of Ike. There were too many possibilities that were impossible to calculate, but at the very least, we would finally have some chance at victory. When I came to this realization, I began my preparations. From reaching my goal to the steps that were necessary, after my hard work all this time, I had quite a few pieces in my hand. Lacking in magical logic, Margaret and Amelia both provided me with large amounts of information, and the information on the elements gotten from, stolen from Cairo City were precious as well. But what gave me the biggest clue was Elisa. She was able to use the elements of ice and fire that countered each other to create her own soul imprint, which gave me a huge clue. At the very least, it proved that the relationship between the elements wasn't as simple as countering each other. The four elements that create the world? In Ike, it's wind, fire, water, and earth, which is basically the exact same as my previous world of Earth. When Earth was still ruled by idealism, the East believed that the world consisted of earth, water, fire, and wind, while the West also believed in the four elements of earth, wind, water, and fire. In a way, everything was astonishingly similar. Lacking in actual logic required to create a world? The above was doubtlessly the best evidence of all. All I had to do was lay on the four elements. The ancient curse known as the seal of the four elements that created an isolated, sealed dimension was doubtlessly another form of creation as well. Needing to use four different types of elemental magic simultaneously? Now you realize why I spent so much effort on developing the four elemental sword casters, and why they could obviously use more than four sword seals, but I still addressed them by this name. When the four elemental sword seals activated simultaneously, they would be able to create a relatively perfect elemental loop. Now then, this part was down pat already, but the next part was rather problematic. In order to create a sword seal that could be the foundation for an entire new world, the materials I needed would have to be at a minimum at a god equipment's level. Earlier, the only item I possessed which met those requirements was Sidon War's ocean bottle. With only one god equipment, I wouldn't even be able to take the first step of my experiment. Luckily, after killing Lorcan on that day, he left a grey earth elemental heart behind for me, which was also a god equipment level elemental material. Currently, runes were inscribed all over these two god equipment, and they were already beginning to create internally within themselves. Of course, in terms of level, the Earth Elemental Heart was far inferior to Sidon War's ocean bottle, but it was still good enough for an experiment. As long as it succeeded, I could always prepare new substitute materials. What substitute materials? How about Lorcan's real Earth Elemental Heart after defeating him here? This would be the exact same thing but higher quality, and the divine soul contained within it would be perfect for being one of the four pillars of birthing a new world. Yep, from the very start, I didn't have good intentions. All the problems were solved, all the obstacles were dealt with, and all the various assortments of necessary pieces were collected. Finally, it was time for the critical first step. It was just drawing the frozen Northlands in my heart with elemental power, but after reaching this step, just creating a magical version of the world in my mind could never satisfy me. What I wanted was to use my own paintbrush to create a true new world. This was the path that I choose. Come, original sin demon form, war angel. A blinding golden light and molten magma red crossed with each other. After pain shot through my entire body, they naturally combined with each other and emanated a calm, white light, akin to the sunrise. When too many colors mixed together, they would either become an endless pitch black or a peaceful combination of pure white. Without a doubt, this white light represented a miracle. The order and chaos bloodline from the same source was actually beginning to combine. If it weren't for reaching this step, perhaps I never would have realized that the arbitrator bloodline that I possessed with two seemingly contradictory talents was supposed to be used from the very start by combining them. My feelings mysteriously managed to calm down, as everything around me entered my senses. My molten skin transformed into dark red runic armor, and my body naturally began floating in midair. Under the frame of a demon's meaty wings were also the wings of light that only the highest level angels could possess. I was filled with limitless power. For any fanatic believer, this form, which represented chaos and order within one body, would be the greatest sin of all. If it weren't for the fact that the earth elemental plane blocked off the view of the gods, trouble would likely instantly come looking for me. I also knew that my time was limited. Just a few seconds used up much of my mana. Under this form, my magic power was comparable to any legend-ranked archmage, but I wouldn't be able to maintain it for more than a few seconds. Whether I live or die will depend on this next step. Even if I had already formed my theory, there were still too many holes in it, and don't even mention the differences between theory and actually putting it into practice. But right now, I didn't have any way to continually experiment. I couldn't change the course of the arrow that I had shot. Recreate, Wall of Eternal Ice. In the ice mountain, Sidon War's ocean bottle was beginning to shine with a snow-white light, while that earth elemental heart was also beginning to float in midair. Its earthen yellow light had already created a vicious sandstorm. If it weren't for the fact that I had already set up an ice and snow barrier, probably anyone even thousands of kilometers away would be able to see this phenomenon. The earth elemental heart was struggling, as if it knew its end was coming, but it now had nowhere it could escape. Only having ice and snow won't be a true world. In that case, let this world of ice and snow have its own true frozen earth. While something was happening in the earth elemental plane, the divine domain where the gods resided suffered an earthquake, or perhaps it should be termed as a dimensional quake. Indeed, apart from incredibly few existences, they weren't able to see through to the elemental planes, but some things didn't require vision to detect. Lord Ayor, I have an inquiry from the gods. The Temple of Fate suddenly had an earthquake, which indicated that something critically important must have happened, but when they asked the God of Fate, the God of Fate only shook his head and did not say anything. Now, rumors are flying everywhere and the situation is quite chaotic, which is why the gods are requesting your presence for a discussion. The messenger, Flying Wing Arrows, was once a famous hero in the mortal plane, who gained fame for being able to fly 1,000 kilometers in a single night. However, in the Death God's main sanctuary, he was nothing more than a low-ranked messenger who didn't even dare to breathe loudly. That's why they're coming to ask me. Usually, they don't even know how to self-reflect. Ayor's calm words had a tinge of dissatisfaction to them. When faced with one of the most ancient gods of all, the Death God, even God-on voice would be filled with fear. If Ayor decided to vent his displeasure against the gods on arrows, he wouldn't even be able to escape as he was only a mere heroic spirit. Wait a moment, I'll come along with you. I just happen to have a few things to chat about. This seemed too good to be true, and Iros was delighted to hear such words, but Ayor continued speaking. Go ahead without me, I'll come after I make some preparations. What else could Iros say? He hurriedly left as if he had been spared from some punishment. The Death God's sanctuary was far too much pressure for him to bear. But right after Iros left, the cold-faced Ayor suddenly broke out into laughter, and the sandbox behind him began to automatically rearrange its sand. The next moment, Roland and the situation around him was shown in front of the Death God. Roland, you interesting fellow, you truly dare to do what nobody else does. You even managed to find the correct path. Perhaps everything truly will be able to change because of you. If anyone else had been present, they likely would never have expected to see Ayor, who was famous for being cold-faced for thousands of years, to be smiling in such satisfaction. In the next moment, the Death God began moving, but before he left, his black-robed arm lightly slapped down on the sandbox. Boom! All of the sand turned into nothing but loose sand, and in the next second, Cairo's connection to the mortal plane was entirely cut off. No, it should be said that the entire Earth elemental plane's connection was cut off. After that, though, Ayor began hesitating, and then he slapped the sandbox 3 more times. Slap slap slap. This time, the wind, water, and fire elemental planes were also cut off from the mortal plane. Only then did Ayor leave in self-satisfaction. What excuse should I use? A sudden dimensional quake shattered the barrier between dimensions, causing a temporary stoppage in the connection between dimensions, especially the elemental planes. It will not be possible to reach them until several months later. Yep, this is a nice excuse.